Yo, Atlas speaking and welcome to part 12 of What If I Was Reborn in Naruto as the Akatsuki Mastermind controlling Shinobi history. Let the tale begin. Chapter 301, The Power of the Gedo Statue. After finalizing the plan to collect the tailed beasts, creating a weapon of war, and using absolute power to intimidate the Shinobi world, the high-level meeting in Amagakure came to an end. Before the meeting, Yahiko never imagined the discussion would veer toward the tailed beasts. The act of gathering the tailed beasts would undoubtedly offend the 5 great shinobi villages. Even if done in secret, there was always the risk of exposure. But some things are worth doing, even if they risk failure. If reviving the Ten Tails could truly bring decades of peace to the shinobi world, what did it matter if he became a villain? He, Konan, Nagato, and Byakuya were war orphans with nothing to their names except the dream of world peace. Even if their actions ultimately failed, they would leave their mark on the history of the shinobi world. After the meeting concluded, Yahiko was about to return to his office in Amagakure to work when Byakuya stopped him. With a light chuckle, Byakuya said, "Yahiko, don't rush back to work. Let's take a look at the Gedo statue first." "What's there to see about the Gedo statue?" Yahiko's twitched. There were still countless village matters awaiting his signature. He was extremely busy. But on second thought, he realized he had never truly examined the Gedo statue, so he nodded in agreement. With Yahiko convinced, Byakuya turned to Konan and Nagato, who both agreed without objection, eager to visit the Gedo statue. They, too, were curious about what gave the Gedo statue the power to intimidate the shinobi world. The group moved quickly, arriving shortly after at a vast underground cavern outside Amagakure. The cavern was enormous, with a ceiling over 100 meters high and an area spanning several football fields. In the depths of the cavern, the group immediately spotted the central figure, the Gedo statue. The statue was grotesque, with 9 eyes and a body resembling desiccated wood. 10 column-like protrusions jutted out from its back, making it look like a meditating demon god. At first glance, Konan found the statue strangely familiar, as if it had been crafted using wood-release techniques, something Byakuya happened to specialize in. Having seen Byakuya use wood-release before, Konan had memorized its distinctive traits. "Byakuya, this Gedo statue looks like it's made of wood. Is it related to wood-release?" Byakuya nodded and explained, "The Gedo statue is indeed connected to wood-release. In fact, it is the origin of wood-release. Though it appears withered and damaged now, its vitality is astonishing. Heck, its destructive power surpasses that of most tailed beasts." Hearing this, Konan swiftly moved closer to the statue. As she approached, she felt its overwhelming vitality, accompanied by an inexplicable sense of dread. It was as if her body and chakra were instinctively recoiling from the Gedo statue. Unable to stay near it for long, Konan returned to Byakuya's side, visibly shaken, and asked with a trembling voice, "Byakuya, I believe this Gedo statue is the shell of the Ten Tails. Its oppressive presence is simply terrifying." Nearby, Yahiko stroked his chin, deep in thought. He, too, felt the suffocating pressure emanating from the Gedo statue, which reinforced the feasibility of Byakuya's plan. But was the Gedo statue truly reliable? Could the Akatsuki control such a force? And what would happen if the statue turned against them? At that moment, Nagato, who had been silent, showed a surprised expression. "Compared to a few years ago, the Gedo statue seems much stronger now. I remember it being much weaker before. Byakuya, did you do something to enhance it?" Byakuya nodded again and said, "You're correct, Nagato. Over the years, I've been working to restore the Gedo statue. I tried having ninja infuse it with chakra and even relocating it to areas rich in chakra, but the results were unsatisfactory. Eventually, after researching its origins, I realized the Gedo statue needs tailed beasts to regain its strength. So, I captured a Jinchuriki to provide it with chakra." "You captured a Jinchuriki?" Nagato quickly caught onto the key detail and, after a moment's thought, asked, "Was it during that mission to Yagakure, when we were hired by Jiraiya-sensei?" "Exactly. After capturing the Two Tails Jinchuriki, I secretly kept her instead of handing her over to Konoha or Kumogakure. It was all in preparation for reviving the Ten Tails. Faced with Nagato's skepticism, Byakuya revealed everything without hesitation. Conan, shocked, exclaimed, "That was 3 years ago. You were planning to revive the Ten Tails as far back as 3 years ago? That's way too early." Byakuya took a deep breath and replied with a hint of helplessness, "I've always been someone who plans 3 steps ahead. After securing Amigakure, I began thinking about how to bring more shinobi villages under Akatsuki's influence, but due to Amigakure's inherent limitations, no matter how fast we develop, we lack the ability to challenge the 5 great shinobi villages. Only by possessing an overwhelming power can we make the 5 great shinobi villages truly listen to us." Conan nodded, understanding the truth in Byakuya's words. If not for Byakuya's near-maniacal strategic thinking, Akatsuki would have perished under Hanzo and Danzo's combined assaults long ago. After a long silence, Yahiko stood with his hands behind his back and asked, "What's the condition of the Two-Tails Jinchuriki? I recall you mentioned in the meeting earlier that during the process of collecting the tailed beasts, you need to extract them from their Jinchuriki and seal them into the Gedo statue." Byakuya glanced toward the sealed chamber behind the Gedo statue. After sensing the state of the sealing array within, he replied, "Her condition isn't great, but it's not terrible either." Yahiko sighed deeply. "Don't make her suffer too long. Once the timing is right, proceed with the sealing ceremony. For a Jinchuriki, being imprisoned like this is a torment in itself." Both Conan and Nagato nodded in agreement. In the shinobi world, it was common knowledge that once a tailed beast was extracted from its Jinchuriki, the host would die due to the sudden loss of vast amounts of chakra and life force. Thus, the process of collecting the tailed beasts inevitably endangered the Jinchuriki's life. Though Yahiko and the others were pragmatic ninja, they didn't want to see a Jinchuriki endure excessive suffering. Byakuya's tone turned slightly odd as he said, "Who told you a Jinchuriki has to die when separated from their tailed beast? As long as a large amount of life force is supplied promptly, a Jinchuriki can survive even after the tailed beast is extracted." "Heh! Do you underestimate the Uzumaki clan's bloodline, or are you underestimating my medical ninjutsu?" Chapter 302, The Revitalized Demigod Hanzo. Learning that Jinchuriki could survive the extraction of their tailed beasts eased Yahiko and the others. Their lingering guilt disappeared, leaving their minds clearer. Byakuya observed their reaction silently, letting out a faint sigh. Yahiko, Nagato, and Conan are too kind-hearted. They're even worried about strangers they've never met. Meanwhile, I'm here breaking my back for the sake of Akatsuki. Still, this was the role of a father figure, to shoulder the burdens and protect the crew of Akatsuki's ship. Having set aside their worries, Yahiko turned to Byakuya and asked, "Byakuya, who's your first target? The Jinchuriki from Sunagakure or the one from Kirigakure?" To Yahiko, Sunagakure and Kirigakure seemed like the easiest targets. The reason was simple: these 2 villages were the weakest among the 5 great shinobi villages, located at the edges of the continent. Even if their Jinchuriki disappeared mysteriously, they wouldn't dare to publicize it. Iwagakure and Kumogakure, however, were different. Iwagakure's Jinchuriki, Rashi, and Han were formidable on their own. The disappearance of one would undoubtedly alarm the other. As for Kumogakure, Killer Bee was the strongest Jinchuriki in the world, even surpassing the 4th Raikage. While the 9-Tails Jinchuriki in Konoha might be the easiest to deal with, his mentor, Jiraiya, was still a Konoha shinobi. Confronting their former teacher was something they wanted to avoid for now. Byakuya pondered for a moment before replying, "Kirigakure is already under surveillance by Akatsuki members. When the time is right, we'll be notified to capture the tailed beast there. That's not something we need to worry about. For now, I plan to target Sunagakure's one-tailed Jinchuriki. It should be a relatively straightforward operation." Ignoring Byakuya's latter comment, Yahiko frowned and asked, "You have operatives in Kirigakure? They're capable of monitoring the Jinchuriki's movements? But isn't the 3-Tails Jinchuriki the 4th Mizukage himself? When did you recruit such capable allies?" Byakuya shook his head. "The masked man isn't my subordinate. He's more of an ally. He continued, he was the one who told me about the Gedo statue's purpose and proposed the plan to revive the Ten Tails. Though, to be honest, his reasoning for wanting the Ten Tails is laughable. Yahiko's face darkened. A masked man causing major disturbances in the shinobi world. Could he be the same masked man responsible for the Nine Tails attack? Working with him is like making a deal with the devil. Byakuya chuckled. Don't worry about me. I know him well and understand the chaos he's caused. But against my would release and Nagato's Rinnegan, he can't stir up much trouble. Besides, how else could I track him without cooperating? Dangerous individuals like him are safer to keep close at hand. And let me remind you, he's not the only unusual recruit I've brought in over the years. Yahiko had no retort. Byakuya's recruits were indeed all extremely dangerous. Kakuzu was an infamous bounty hunter who once fought the first Hokage. Sasori of the Red Sand, a master puppeteer and rogue from Sunagakure, was another deadly addition. Even the seemingly inconspicuous Haiden and Shino had troubling backgrounds, being a cultist of Jashin and a leader of the Sky Ninja, respectively. But in a way, Byakuya had amassed a remarkable pool of talent, making Akatsuki a formidable force. After leading the underground cavern, Byakuya returned to Akatsuki's base. After a brief stroll, he found Hanzo the salamander training new recruits and invited him to his office. Seeing the puzzled expression on Hanzo's face, Byakuya smiled meaningfully. Hanzo-sensei, Yahiko and I just discussed it. We decided to fulfill the dream you couldn't achieve. Hanzo's body stiffened. After a pause, he replied, has Akatsuki reached its limits? Are you so eager to challenge the 5 great nations? Why not wait another 10 or 20 years? You're all still young. You can outlast the likes of me and my generation. Once the 3rd Hokage and the 3rd Tsuchikage pass away, you can act as you please. It's not the old men I fear, it's the young who trouble me more. Byakuya chuckled and said, Hanzo-sensei, don't keep saying you're Akatsuki. Aren't you a part of Akatsuki too? Aren't we all shinobi of Akatsuki and Amagakure? Hanzo gave Byakuya a complicated look and replied, Amagakure belongs to Akatsuki, but Akatsuki does not belong to Amagakure. I know what you and Yahiko have been up to all these years. You've secretly annexed several small nations during the Great Ninja War, expanding Akatsuki's influence several-fold. That's something I could never achieve. But let me warn you, when I challenged the 5 great villages, only Sunagakure and Konoha responded. Even then, I was defeated, and Amagakure lost its ambition, confined to the narrow lands of the Land of Rain. Your strength may surpass mine, but if you fail, your punishment will be far harsher than mine. Amagakure itself might cease to exist. So, take my advice, wait a few more decades. Byakuya could tell that Hanzo's concern was genuine. Over the years, he had become deeply integrated into Akatsuki, training recruits and providing sound advice. While Byakuya knew that waiting longer would be ideal, Kagaya's resurrection and the arrival of the Otsutsuki clan wouldn't wait. If he didn't gain strength equal to theirs within 10 years, he would become a mere pawn in the upcoming conflicts. After a moment of silence, Byakuya replied, Your advice is sound, Hanzo-sensei, but I must decline. If I wanted a peaceful life, I could have joined Konoha long ago. With my Uzumaki heritage and would release, I might have even been trained as the next god of shinobi. But I didn't go to Konoha because I found no reason to. My path lies elsewhere. Hanzo fell silent, contemplating Byakuya's words. After a long pause, he finally said, Tell me your plan. Let me see if this old body of mine can still be of use to you. While I may no longer deserve the title of demigod, there are still many in the shinobi world who see me as one. Chapter 303, The Body and the Soul. After listening to Byakuya's elaborate plan for creating a weaponized Ten Tails, the aged salamander Hanzo fell into a long silence. Faced with such an audacious and nearly reckless plan, he struggled to offer any constructive advice. If Byakuya succeeded and the Ten Tails were resurrected, the ninja world could indeed experience a rare era of peace. However, if the plan failed, Amagakure would be plunged into a catastrophe from which it might never recover. After much deliberation, Hanzo finally spoke in a slow, measured tone, "Forgive me, but this old man may not be able to help you much. However, if the plan is exposed, you may as well put the blame on me. I don't care about my reputation anymore." His words were sincere. Hanzo had long ceased to concern himself with legacy or honor. Byakuya chuckled, shaking his head. "I don't believe my plan will fail. Even if it does, I'll bear the consequences alone." With that, he turned and left the room. Byakuya had come merely to test Hanzo's loyalty. It seemed the old man, despite his flaws, still possessed the integrity befitting his title as a demigod. Byakuya was not disappointed. After leaving the training grounds, Byakuya headed toward another section of the base. With the one-tailed Jinchuriki set as their primary target, it was time to decide on the team for the mission. Within Akatsuki, the two people most familiar with Sunagakure were Sasori of the Red Sand and Orochimaru. The former was Sunagakure's most gifted puppet master and the grandson of Chiyo, one of the village's elders. The latter had previously commanded the Kikyo Mountain campaign and had clashed with the 4th Kazekage on the battlefield. As a result, Orochimaru was undoubtedly Konoha's foremost expert on Sunagakure. From what Byakuya remembered, Orochimaru maintained a secret connection with Sunagakure even after defecting from Konoha. In the original storyline, just before the Chunin exams, the 4th Kazekage even invited Orochimaru to collaborate on the Konoha Crush plan. During the exam, Orochimaru had orchestrated chaos in an attempt to destroy Konoha. What the 4th Kazekage didn't know, however, was that Orochimaru never intended to destroy Konoha. He merely wanted to catch up with his former mentor and ensure that Hiruzen Sarutobi met his end in combat. Orochimaru had, in fact, assassinated the 4th Kazekage before the plan even began. Snapping himself out of his musings, Byakuya found Sasori in the Akatsuki laboratory. Beyond a glass partition, Sasori was meticulously assembling puppet limbs. Some of the limbs were crafted from steel and wood, while others were made of flesh and blood. Since Sasori had developed his wireless puppet control technology, Byakuya had been encouraging him to delve into prosthetic puppetry. Though Sasori did not entirely grasp Byakuya's intent, he eagerly pursued any advancements in puppet craft. Byakuya's reasoning was simple. In the ninja world, both shinobi and civilians frequently suffered amputations or other injuries. Instead of living out their days with crutches, wouldn't it be better to replace lost limbs with chakra-controlled puppet prosthetics? In a way, this aligned with Sasori's philosophy of eternal puppetry. The key difference was that, unlike others who might reluctantly turn to puppet prosthetics, Sasori had willingly transformed himself. He had condensed his consciousness and chakra into a core, leaving his physical body almost entirely replaced. As Byakuya's footsteps approached, Sasori turned slowly. Spotting Byakuya, his expression remained as stoic as ever. "Are you here to check on the progress of the prosthetic puppets?" he asked bluntly. "Look, creating prosthetic limbs is simple enough, but controlling them requires substantial knowledge of puppetry. If you're aiming for prosthetics that even ordinary shinobi can use, it'll take at least another 5 years of research." Sasori then added, his tone matter-of-fact. "I say, why not just go with my idea? Convert the injured directly into chakra cores. That way, they'll never have to worry about getting hurt again. Isn't a body of steel superior to one of flesh and blood? Cold, unfeeling steel will never surpass a well-honed, living body," Byakuya thought to himself, suppressing a sigh. "Not everyone is willing to undergo full-body transformation like you, Sasori. And as you mentioned earlier, the technology isn't perfect. Full-body conversion carries significant risks." Sasori scoffed. "To attain an immortal body, risks are inevitable. Without resolve and determination, how can one even hope to be a proper ninja?" Byakuya couldn't help but sweat at Sasori's conviction. "It seems there isn't a single sane scientist in this entire ninja world," he thought ruefully. Under Byakuya's command, 3 scientific ninjas stood out: Sasori, obsessed with puppet modification; Shino, who constantly sought ways to enhance the human body, and Orochimaru, who focused on researching Kekkei Genkai and natural energy while delving into soul-based studies. From this perspective, even without pursuing the Moon's Eye plan, the Akatsuki could easily be seen as the quintessential villains. After a moment of contemplation, Byakuya addressed Sasori. This visit isn't about prosthetics. After discussions with the organization's higher-ups, we've decided to initiate the Ten Tails hunting plan. Hunting the tailed beasts? Sasori raised his eyebrows slightly. He had long understood Byakuya's overarching goals and wasn't particularly surprised. However, he had expected the execution of the Ten Tails plan to be delayed by a few more years. After a brief pause, Sasori asked, "Which tailed beast are we targeting first? And besides me, will there be other team members?" "Of course, the beasts will be hunted in order. I plan to start with the one tail." After a short pause, Byakuya added, "As for your teammate, it will still be Orochimaru. However, since this is the first mission, I'll be accompanying you as well." "Going after Bunpuku, the monk? And working with Orochimaru again?" Sasori muttered, clearly dissatisfied with the arrangement, not because of any personal connection to Bunpuku, but because he despised teaming up with Orochimaru. The conflict between the two wasn't limited to their scientific disagreements, their personalities clashed fundamentally. With that in mind, Sasori turned to Byakuya and said, "I don't need Orochimaru as a teammate. I can hunt the one-tailed Jinchuriki by myself." Byakuya shook his head and replied, "I trust your abilities, but the fourth Kazekage's magnet release counters your wind shadow puppet. Moreover, Sunagakure has more than just the Kazekage to defend it." Sasori's expression shifted at Byakuya's words. He wasn't wrong. Aside from the fourth Kazekage, Sunagakure had plenty of other skilled ninjas. There was Pakura, who had been sent to Kirigakure as a scapegoat a few years ago, and Sasori's own grandmother, Elder Chiyo. The puppetry skills he now excelled in had all been taught to him by Chiyo. Although Sasori had surpassed his grandmother in the art of puppetry, defeating her in battle was a far more challenging task. Considering this, Sasori knew that taking on Sunagakure alone was impossible, let alone capturing the one-tailed Jinchuriki alive. Noticing Sasori's internal conflict, Byakuya spoke again, his tone calm but firm, "Bring your puppets and come with me to find Orochimaru. This plan cannot move forward without him." Chapter 304, Sasori receives a mission from Akatsuki. After packing most of the puppets from the warehouse into storage scrolls, Sasori and Byakuya departed from the Akatsuki base. As Sasori donned the Hiriko puppet, Byakuya couldn't help but ask, "Sasori, for someone like you, who has undergone core transformation, does this count as wearing a body or just clothes?" Sasori glanced at Byakuya, silent for a while before replying, "I'm not sure if this is a body or clothing." "Byakuya-sama, isn't this question a bit trivial? I was just curious." Seeing Sasori unable to provide an answer, Byakuya dropped the subject. He soared into the air, heading toward the land of fields. Sasori summoned his third Kazekage puppet and followed closely behind. A few hours later, the two arrived at Odogakure, the sound village in the land of fields. Orochimaru, having been informed beforehand, stood on the ground, awaiting their arrival. Without any preamble, Byakuya landed and addressed Orochimaru directly. "Orochimaru, how's the preparation for what I asked you to do?" Orochimaru's expression showed some hesitation as he replied, "The modifications to Edo Tensei are still incomplete. If I force its usage, there may be unforeseen consequences." "That's fine. As long as you can successfully perform the technique, we can refine it later." With that, Byakuya gestured for Orochimaru to lead the way. Orochimaru didn't waste words, weaving hand signs and revealing a hidden entrance in the ground. Unlike other villages, Odogakure was predominantly an underground settlement. On the surface, it appeared to be an ordinary village, but hidden below was a vast, sprawling network resembling an underground city. Following Orochimaru through the tunnels, the trio arrived at a wide experimental site. In the center lay a coffin surrounded by an ominous aura of death. Seeing this, Sasori frowned, his curiosity piqued by the mysterious Edo Tensei. Noticing Sasori's confusion, Orochimaru smirked and explained, "This, Sasori, is the forbidden technique I've been improving recently, Edo Tensei. It allows me to summon the souls of the dead from the Pure Land back to the living world." Sasori's body stiffened at Orochimaru's words, his gaze fixed on the coffin. Orochimaru continued, "I've heard that your parents were killed by Konoha's white fan a long time ago. But that's not a problem. If you can provide their genetic material, I can help you reunite with them." With a sly grin, Orochimaru added, "See? I'm always thinking of ways to help my comrades." Sasori's expression darkened. While reviving his parents would be a good thing, he neither trusted Orochimaru nor had access to his parents' remains. Moreover, he suspected Orochimaru was deliberately provoking him. Just as Sasori was about to act, he paused and said instead, "My parents are none of your concern. But as I recall, your parents died in an accident too. Now that you've mastered Edo Tensei, don't you plan to bring them back?" Orochimaru's face froze. He didn't even know who his real parents were. On top of that, his adopted parents had been ordinary people incapable of chakra manipulation. Given how much time had passed, it was uncertain whether their souls still existed in the Pure Land. Sasori was clearly trying to provoke him. The atmosphere grew tense between the two, the air thick with hostility. "Enough," Byakuya interrupted, his expression cold. "We can talk about reviving parents later. Let's focus on seeing Orochimaru's latest results for now." At Byakuya's command, Orochimaru nodded, forming hand signs as the coffin's lid slowly creaked open. Sasori stared intently at the coffin, wondering which ninja would emerge. Byakuya, however, showed no interest. He already knew who Orochimaru had summoned, as it was under his orders. Moments later, the reanimated third Kazekage emerged from the coffin. Sasori's expression twisted at the sight of the third Kazekage. This was the man he had killed and turned into a human puppet. How had Orochimaru managed to summon him with Edo Tensei? Orochimaru smirked, his tone dripping with intrigue. "Sasori, I deliberated for a long time before deciding to summon the third Kazekage. I've always been curious, what's more important to a ninja, the body or the soul?" Sasori snorted disdainfully, pulling out a storage scroll. With a flick, he summoned his third Kazekage puppet. "Funny, I was wondering the same thing. Let's see which is stronger, your Edo Tensei or my puppetry." Instead of responding directly, Orochimaru turned his gaze toward Byakuya. Byakuya gave a subtle nod, silently allowing the confrontation. Orochimaru began to manipulate the reanimated third Kazekage, drawing iron sand from the surrounding rocks and forming sharp triangular structures. Not to be outdone, Sasori commanded his puppet to manipulate pre-prepared iron sand, shaping it into cone-like formations. The clash was immediate and intense. The triangular and conical iron sand constructs collided, scattering fragments in all directions with loud, resonating booms. After several exchanges, neither Orochimaru nor Sasori gained the upper hand. Both were effectively controlling the same Kazekage, making the battle appear like a strange duel of self-opposition. Meanwhile, the Edo Tensei third Kazekage began to regain clarity amidst the repeated clashes. His consciousness returned, and he stared in disbelief at his decayed body, then at the puppet crafted from his corpse. The realization hit him like a thunderbolt. Not only had he been assassinated, but even in death, his body and soul were being exploited by different ninjas. It was an unparalleled humiliation. Noticing signs of mental collapse in the Kazekage, Byakuya intervened, calling off the battle. "Enough!" He instructed Orochimaru to release the Edo Tensei. As the jutsu was undone, Byakuya turned to Orochimaru, his tone measured but resolute. "Orochimaru, your Edo Tensei is already highly refined. It's sufficient for us to move to the next stage." "What stage?" Orochimaru asked, his curiosity piqued. Before Byakuya could answer, Sasori interjected with a scoff. "Our mission this time is to infiltrate Sunagakure and hunt down the one-tailed Jinchuriki. Judging by your display earlier, your abilities might actually be useful during the operation." Sasori's confidence was palpable as he continued, Byakuya-sama will oversee the mission. Your job is to stall the 4th Kazekage. Leave the one-tailed Jinchuriki to me. I'll ensure it's brought back to the base without fail. Byakuya shook his head, correcting Sasori. Sasori, our mission isn't just to capture the one-tailed Jinchuriki. We aim to control Sunagakure itself. Control Sunagakure? Sasori's eyes narrowed as he turned to Byakuya. Byakuya's calm demeanor remained as he explained, if we openly hunt the one-tail, it will inevitably alert the other villages. By taking control of Sunagakure, we can seal off any leaks and maintain an element of surprise. Sasori crossed his arms, skepticism evident. Controlling Sunagakure won't be easy. If Rasa goes missing, it'll draw the attention of that old hag Chiyo. Killing Rasa and installing another puppet will be tricky at best. Byakuya's expression turned enigmatic as he glanced at Sasori, a faint smile playing on his lips. That's why I intend for you to become the 5th Kazekage. Once you assume that role, we won't have to worry about our activities being exposed. The room fell silent as Sasori processed Byakuya's audacious plan. The prospect of becoming the Kazekage was unexpected, yet strangely enticing. For Sasori, this was no ordinary mission, it was a challenge that could redefine the balance of power across the shinobi world. Chapter 305, Raza and Yashimaru. In Sunagakure, the 4th Kazekage, Rasa, wiped sweat from his brow as he exited the underground mines. A nearby Suna ninja rushed forward, offering him salted water and a towel. Rasa accepted the water gratefully, drinking deeply before wiping his face and heading toward the Kazekage building. Once inside his office, Rasa wasted no time. Sitting down, he began addressing the endless pile of documents detailing the village's affairs. As the leader of Sunagakure, he knew he couldn't afford even a moment of negligence. This was the harsh reality of Sunagakure's position. Though officially one of the 5 great shinobi villages, Sunagakure lagged far behind Konoha, Iwagakure, and Kumogakure in both strength and numbers. These 3 villages not only boasted more elite shinobi but also far outstripped Suna in sheer manpower. The only thing keeping Sunagakure from being overrun by its neighbors, Konoha and Iwagakure, was its possession of Shikaku, the One-Tail, and its meager wealth. Even so, Sunagakure suffered a humiliating defeat to Konoha in the last great ninja war, forcing it into a subordinate alliance with Konoha. While officially allies, in truth, Suna had become little more than a vassal state. Merchants from the Land of Fire moved freely through the Land of Wind without paying tariffs. Mission requests that once belonged to Suna were now funneled to Konoha. Even the daimyo of the Land of Wind had begun questioning the necessity of Suna's existence, considering replacing it with Konoha as the nation's protector. Military funding for Sunagakure had been drastically reduced as a result. These measures choked the village's development, limiting the number of shinobi Suna could sustain. If this trend continued for another decade or two, Sunagakure would inevitably decline into a second-rate village, eventually fading from history altogether. Rasa, as the 4th Kazekage, was determined to prevent that outcome. He had fought hard to defeat his rival, Pakura, and ascend to his position, not to lead a failing village. Thus, he shouldered the immense burden of revitalizing Sunagakure, carefully allocating its limited resources to maintain a viable shinobi force. With insufficient students in the academy, Rasa implemented an elite training system. No student could graduate without demonstrating skills near the level of a chunin. When the daimyo's resources proved insufficient to sustain a large shinobi force, Rasa personally worked in the mines, using his magnet release to extract gold to fund the village. No matter how exhausting it was, he refused to stop until the village regained its strength. As he sorted through intelligence reports brought by the Suna Anbu, Rasa's attention lingered on updates about Konoha and Iwagakure. He had always closely monitored Konoha's affairs. During the Nine-Tails attack, he had sent a letter of condolence to the 3rd Hokage while secretly hoping Konoha would collapse under the chaos. When conflict broke out between Konoha and Kumogakure, Rasa sent reinforcements and restricted the activities of Lightning Country citizens in Sunagakure. Despite these measures, Suna remained at a disadvantage. Even after losing the 4th Hokage and the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, Konoha's strength was still overwhelming compared to Suna. Konoha's ranks included the legendary Sannin, the Hokage, Danzo, and powerful clans like the Hyuga and Uchiha. Against such a lineup, Suna couldn't hope to compete in a direct confrontation. However, recent developments sparked a flicker of opportunity in Raza's mind. The Uchiha clan's massacre had destabilized Konoha internally, and Iwagakure's border skirmishes with Konoha suggested cracks in its exterior. Raza began to consider whether now might be the time to strike. A well-timed attack could put enough pressure on Konoha to force concessions. Even if they couldn't seize territory, breaking free from Konoha's economic grip would be a significant victory. High-risk and high-reward plans like this were typical for Suna Shinobi. Life in the desert had taught them that survival often hinged on bold gambles. But Raza faced a unique challenge that his predecessors hadn't. Sunagakure lacked younger elite jonin to take his place if something happened to him. If he fell in battle, the village would be left leaderless. Moreover, previous Kazekage gambles had all ended in disastrous losses. Another failure could spell the end of Sunagakure altogether. For now, Raza could only continue to weigh his options, determined to protect his village at all costs, even if it meant risking everything. Pulling his wandering thoughts back into focus, the 4th Kazekage, Raza, abandoned his plan to backstab Konoha. He certainly didn't want Sunagakure to become a casualty in the ongoing conflict between Konoha and Iwagakure. Moreover, Sunagakure currently didn't have a suitable Jinchuriki, and they didn't have the strength to launch an assault on Konoha. Thinking of the Jinchuriki, Raza furrowed his brows and called out to the surrounding air, "Anbu, how is Gaara doing? Is he still unable to control his temper, unable to manage Shikaku inside him?" A moment of silence passed before the Anbu responded, "Kazekage-sama, Lord Gaara still cannot control Shikaku." After a brief pause, the Anbu agent hesitated before continuing. "Kazekage-sama, don't you think it's a bit too much to keep provoking Gaara-sama? Over the past few months, he's already killed many of our own ninjas. We're worried that Gaara-sama will be overwhelmed by this pressure and be consumed by Shikaku. Are you trying to teach me how to do things?" Raza's expression hardened as he narrowed his eyes. "Also, stop calling Gaara Gaara-sama. He is the Jinchuriki of this village. The Jinchuriki is nothing more than a tool for expanding our power, and tools don't need to be worried about others' opinions. But Gaara is your and Karura-sama's child." The Suna Anbu spoke cautiously, seemingly trying to convince Raza to reconsider his harsh treatment of Gaara. With a cold expression, Raza responded, "Yashimaru, since you're so intent on defending Gaara, I'll make myself clear, I have already lost faith in Gaara. I'm planning to replace him with a new Jinchuriki. Tonight, you're to assassinate Gaara and tell him you hate him. If he manages to control Shikaku's power this time, I might consider letting him remain as the Jinchuriki." With those words, Raza made a gesture signaling the end of the conversation. Yashimaru shot one last, lingering glance at Raza before slowly stepping back and leaving the Kazekage office. He couldn't help but feel disappointed in the 4th Kazekage. Raza might be a competent leader, but he was certainly no good father or husband, or perhaps, a person. Chapter 306, A Kind and Harmonious Family. After 3 days of travel, Byakuya and his group finally arrived at Sunagakure. Sunagakure was located in a massive basin oasis, surrounded by towering cliffs dozens of meters high, with only a narrow canyon serving as its entrance and exit. Patrolling Sunagakure shinobi lined both sides of the canyon, including those with sensory abilities to discern whether incoming individuals were shinobi or civilians. Just as Orochimaru was about to make a move against the patrolling guards, Sasori stopped him. "The captain of the patrol is one of my people. We can enter Sunagakure openly." Hearing this, Orochimaru smirked. "You've planted quite a number of spies in Sunagakure. Were you planning to become the 5th Kazekage all along and kept those spies as insurance?" Sasori ignored Orochimaru and turned to Byakuya. "Byakuya-sama, defeating Raza is no difficult task for us, but becoming the 5th Kazekage without raising suspicion will be extremely challenging." Granny Chio won't agree, and Rasa certainly won't willingly relinquish his position. Byakuya did not respond directly to Sasori but instead changed the subject. Your ascension to Kazekage can wait. Right now, we have a show worth watching. After a brief pause, Byakuya formed seals with his hands and created a wood clone. He then instructed Orochimaru, Orochimaru, leave Sunagakure with my clone and proceed as planned. Sasori and I will find some entertainment. Entertainment? Orochimaru squinted slightly, his curiosity piqued. However, since Byakuya had spoken, he obediently complied, leaving only a few small creatures to gather intelligence for him. After Orochimaru and the wood clone departed, Sasori turned to Byakuya curiously. Byakuya-sama, what entertainment could Sunagakure possibly offer that pleases you so much? Byakuya glanced toward the location where the Jinchuriki was held and chuckled coldly. Why, a heartwarming family drama, of course. I never expected Sunagakure to not only neglect their own Jinchuriki but also send Shinobi to assassinate him. Rasa really is out of his mind. Rasa sent someone to assassinate the One-Tail's Jinchuriki? Sasori's face turned stiff from confusion. He couldn't understand why Rasa would do such a thing. Also, wasn't the Jinchuriki supposed to be the monk Bunpuku? When did that change? He thought Bunpuku was his rival. Although Bunpuku seemed mild-mannered and willingly confined himself in the Temple of Wind, Sasori knew the monk was actually the strongest shinobi in Sunagakure at the time. Now that Bunpuku was gone, the village's strength was bound to drop significantly. 10 minutes later, Byakuya and Sasori reached the place where the Jinchuriki was confined. The area was desolate, with only a handful of guards stationed nearby, clearly an opportunity deliberately left for someone to carry out an assassination attempt. Sensing the One-Tail's chakra lingering in the air, Sasori wasn't shocked by the power of the tailed beast but by Byakuya's incredible sensory abilities. Even from over 10 kilometers away, Byakuya could sense the One-Tail's chakra. This implied that any shinobi targeted by Byakuya would have no chance of escape. Noticing Sasori's emotional fluctuation, Byakuya said nothing. After performing the Mayfly technique, Byakuya led Sasori underground, tunneling through solid earth to appear directly in Gaara's room. Gaara, with his dark circles and lifeless demeanor, resembled a perpetually overworked corporate employee, devoid of any vitality typical of a child. It wasn't that Gaara didn't want to sleep, various reasons made it impossible for him to rest peacefully. His only relief came from brief naps that never lasted more than an hour. Coupled with Shikaku's constant interference and his father Rasa's loving assassination attempts, Gaara was perpetually on the brink of collapse, ready to lose control at any moment. While Byakuya observed Gaara, Sasori silently did the same. From Gaara, Sasori sensed a kindred spirit. He remembered being just as despondent after losing his parents. Memories of those days stirred in Sasori's mind, making his emotions increasingly complex. He had thought transforming himself into a puppet would eliminate these human emotions, but returning to his hometown and seeing familiar streets had reawakened them. A few minutes later, Gaara, who had been in a state of light slumber, noticed the presence of Shinobi in his room. Instinctively, he grabbed a handful of sand and warily observed Byakuya and Sasori. He had been attacked too many times before. Were these two the latest assassins? If they truly bore ill intent, should he deal with them as he had dealt with others? Seeing that Gaara was awake, Byakuya smiled and greeted him. Hello, Gaara. Nice to meet you. I look forward to working with you in the future. Working together? Gaara's face was filled with confusion. He could sense no killing intent from Byakuya, suggesting the man wasn't an assassin. Perhaps he had come simply to meet him. But Gaara was Sunagakure's Jinchuriki, the village's most dangerous individual. Who would risk approaching him to form a friendship? Was this a new assassination tactic, starting with kind words before striking? Seeing Gaara's guarded expression, Byakuya chuckled. Relax, little pal. Neither of us is here to assassinate you. In fact, Rasa doesn't have the authority to command us. He's just a mere Kazekage. Gaara narrowed his eyes. Rasa was his father and the leader of Sunagakure. Though Gaara had attended the ninja academy for only a few years, he knew the Kazekage held a significant position in the ninja world. For these two to dismiss Rasa as unimportant, they must be shinobi from another village. You think the Kazekage is insignificant? Who are you, and why have you come to Sunagakure? What's your purpose? Gaara demanded. Byakuya glanced at Gaara and pointed to Sasori. I'm not a Sunagakure shinobi, but he certainly is. As for our purpose. After a brief pause, Byakuya continued, I'm here to visit the village. He's here to become the Kazekage. Rasa has held the position long enough, so it's time for a change. You're here to become the Kazekage? Gaara's expression shifted, his gaze growing cold as he stared at Byakuya and Sasori. Although I don't fully understand who you are, you're definitely enemies of Sunagakure. As he spoke, Gaara began to radiate the One-Tail's violent chakra, distorting the air around him. Seeing this, Byakuya wasted no time. Golden chains emerged from his back, binding Gaara midair and completely draining him of chakra. After lowering Gaara back down, Byakuya smiled and said, a child shouldn't let emotions take over when facing problems. What would you do if you encountered an opponent you couldn't defeat? I'm clearly someone you can't handle. By the way, you said something about assassin earlier, eh? Well, little pal, we're not the assassins, but the real ones are coming soon. I suspect they might be someone familiar to you, perhaps even a relative. Once you deal with the attackers, we can talk again. Before Gaara could respond, Byakuya and Sasori vanished from the room. Left alone, Gaara looked unsettled, his expression shifting unpredictably. The shinobi who had just appeared were too powerful, so strong that even Shikaku's chakra was suppressed in an instant. Who were they to possess such terrifying strength? Gaara didn't have time to dwell on the question, he could already hear footsteps approaching from outside. Chapter 307, I was once a child too. Under the pale moonlight, Gaara quickly spotted the figure lurking outside his room. The person wore a Sunagakure forehead protector and the attire of an ANBU operative, revealing only part of their face, making it hard to discern their true identity. Despite this, Gaara recognized the person. It was Yashimaru, his uncle, one of the few people in the village who cared for him. If this had been just a few hours earlier, Gaara would have been delighted to see Yashimaru. Yashimaru was different from the other villagers. He told Gaara stories of brave shinobi and encouraged him to resist Shikaku's influence, urging him to take control of his destiny. But earlier that evening, two mysterious figures had intruded into his room. They subdued him with overwhelming power and told him something he found hard to believe, that tonight, a close confidant of his would attempt to assassinate him. If that information was true, then the assassin tonight could only be Yashimaru. Feeling anxious and uncertain, Gaara opened his door and looked at Yashimaru. Yashimaru glanced into Gaara's room, then casually sat down in a corner. With a sigh, he said, Gaara, this will be the last time I visit you. Why? Are you going on a mission, Uncle Yashimaru? Yashimaru nodded, his gaze lingering briefly on the gourd on Gaara's back before he said, you could say it's a mission. I am about to carry out a very dangerous plan. Whether it succeeds or fails, you won't see me again. Gaara sensed that something was wrong. Instinctively stepping back, he bumped into the wall behind him. Why would you say that, uncle? You're one of the strongest shinobi in the village. What mission could be too dangerous for you? Yashimaru took a step forward, forcing Gaara into the corner. Slowly, he said, ordinary missions wouldn't be a problem for a shinobi of my level, but dealing with a Jinchuriki is another matter. The power of a Jinchuriki far exceeds that of a regular shinobi. Even now, I have no guarantee of success. Gaara froze. Staring into Yashimaru's eyes, he cautiously asked, did father order you to get rid of me? Just because I'm not the kind of Jinchuriki he wants? Because I don't meet his standards? Yashimaru shook his head and said, this has nothing to do with Rasa. I want to kill you. Don't you know? Your birth caused Karura's death, my beloved sister. If not for you, Karura would still be alive. Rasa wouldn't have lost his wife, and Kankuro and Temari wouldn't have lost their mother. Your existence was a mistake from the very beginning. As he spoke, Yashimaru's tone grew increasingly intense, his eyes wild. He pulled out a kunai from his pouch and thrust it toward Gaara's throat. Just before the blade made contact, a clump of sand blocked the attack. Seeing the sand automatically protecting Gaara, Yashimaru's eyes flickered. He quickly formed a series of seals and unleashed several advanced wind release techniques. Blades of translucent wind took shape and shot toward Gaara. Gaara simply waved his hand, and the sand intercepted the wind blades. Staring at Yashimaru, he said firmly, "Uncle Yashimaru, my birth wasn't a mistake. I didn't kill my mother." Yashimaru's expression remained blank. Before coming here, he had steeled himself for this moment. To force out Gaara's latent potential, he was prepared to say anything, no matter how cruel. Only this way could Gaara's value as a Jinchuriki be fully realized, ensuring he remained Shikaku's host. After 2 rounds of probing attacks, their battle spilled outside the room. One was a Sunagakure elite Jonin, the other was a Jinchuriki host to Shikaku. The clash between uncle and nephew caused quite a commotion, even shaking the ground. Not far away, Byakuya and Sasori watched the fight unfold. For them, a Jonin-level skirmish was mildly entertaining but ultimately unimpressive. In his current state, without entering full-tailed beast mode, Gaara was just a child protected by his mother's chakra. He could borrow some of Shikaku's chakra, but doing so would drive him to lose control of his sanity. In contrast, Yashimaru's abilities paled in comparison. While being a Jonin was respectable within the ninja world, it was unimpressive in the Akatsuki, an organization filled with powerhouses. A mere Jonin was at best a peripheral member, suitable for running errands. Byakuya watched Gaara and Yashimaru's battle with interest. He had no intention of interfering, he was just enjoying the show. Besides, he was curious to see how Sasori would handle his relationship with Gaara. To secure the position of Kazekage, one needed more than the elder's approval, control over the Jinchuriki was essential. After all, Jinchuriki were the ultimate weapons of mass destruction for the hidden villages. As he observed the fight, Sasori seemed distracted. From Gaara's current expression, Sasori could sense the pain and helplessness buried deep in the boy's heart. He himself had felt a similar despair when he learned of his parents' deaths. Back then, he had a clear goal, to avenge his parents. That purpose had kept him going, driving him to regain his composure quickly. However, things hadn't turned out as he'd hoped. Just when he was ready to go to the front lines and take revenge, the village signed a peace treaty with the Hidden Leaf. A few years later, his nemesis, Tsukumo Hatake, better known as Konoha's White Fang, died in his home under ridiculous circumstances. With his enemy gone and no reason to continue, Sasori lost his purpose in life. He buried himself in the art of puppetry, eventually killing the third Kazekage, the one who had signed the treaty, and leaving Sunagakure behind. Now, standing before him was a child with a story eerily similar to his own. This boy was also the target of his mission, the one-tailed Jinchuriki, whose tailed beast was destined to be extracted and sealed into the demonic statue of the Outer Path. As countless thoughts raced through Sasori's mind, he suddenly disappeared from his spot. Hiriko, his puppet body, moved at incredible speed, appearing behind Yashimaru in an instant. The sharp tail of Hiriko wrapped around Yashimaru and smashed him into the ground with brutal force. Sasori's unexpected intervention immediately caught the attention of both Yashimaru and Gaara. Yashimaru was shocked to discover such a powerful ninja hidden nearby, while Gaara was surprised that Sasori would act at this moment. After rolling across the ground, Yashimaru struggled to his feet, his eyes locked on Sasori. Though he didn't recognize Sasori's altered appearance, the design of Hiriko gave him a clue: it had to be a puppet master, a profession unique to Sunagakure. Could it be that Rasa had sent another puppet master besides him? Had Rasa's promises been lies as well? Was tonight's mission to ensure Gaara's death so they could replace him with a new Jinchuriki? Chapter 308, An Invitation from Orochimaru. Rasa wants to break his promise and deal with Gaara tonight? This thought crossed Yashimaru's mind as he wiped the blood from his lips. Clutching his kunai tightly, he turned to Gaara and said, "Gaara, he's here to assassinate you. Quickly, hide. I'll hold him off." Gaara let out a cold laugh, his gaze fixed on Yashimaru. "Uncle, aren't you here to kill me too? Why don't the two of you team up? It'd be easier to get rid of the burden that's been a curse since birth." Sweat beaded on Yashimaru's forehead. He didn't know how to explain. Indeed, he had come tonight with the intent to kill Gaara. But his goal wasn't to end Gaara's life, it was to provoke him into controlling Shikaku. Once Gaara harnessed enough power, Yashimaru had planned to deliberately expose a fatal opening and sacrifice himself. Left with no choice, Yashimaru said, "Karura loved you until her last breath. If not, why would the sand and chakra she left behind continue to protect you? Please, listen to me. Run far away from this village and find a new life elsewhere." Hearing this, Gaara's expression shifted. But instead of escaping, he remained rooted, yearning for more information about his mother. Seeing this, Yashimaru gritted his teeth and, abandoning further explanations, charged at Sasori. He believed that, combined with Gaara's abilities, they might stand a chance of defeating this puppet master. But if Rasa had indeed orchestrated tonight's events to deal with Gaara, defeating Sasori would mean little, they wouldn't escape Rasa's pursuit. The clash between metal rang out as Yashimaru's kunai snapped against Hiriko's impenetrable exterior. He marveled at the puppet's durability, simultaneously scanning for the puppeteer. Typically, puppet masters operated from a distance, often hidden underground, in blind spots, or camouflage as part of their puppets. Failing to locate Sasori with ninjutsu, Yashimaru's attention returned to Hiriko. A puppet of such size could easily conceal its operator within. If he could break through Hiriko's defenses, he might secure victory. But before Yashimaru could act, Sasori calmly retrieved a summoning scroll and called forth over a dozen puppets. The swarm of puppets overwhelmed Yashimaru, submerging him in a sea of sand and wood. Having subdued Yashimaru, Sasori refrained from killing him outright. Instead, he dragged Yashimaru toward Gaara and threw him to the ground, his tone laced with mockery. "Gaara, if you have questions, ask him now. He won't dare lie to you." Gaara glanced at Yashimaru before turning his icy gaze on Sasori. "Why are you helping me? What do you want from me?" Sasori smirked, his tone indifferent. "I was once a child too. I know there are questions that, if left unanswered, will haunt you forever. I can see it clearly, he doesn't want to kill you. The real assassin lies elsewhere." Sasori's words sank into Gaara's mind. After a long silence, Gaara finally raised his head and muttered, "Thank you." Yashimaru, too, had heard Sasori's words and was filled with confusion. As his thoughts cleared, his mind raced to piece together the clues from their brief encounter. Who was this man? What was his true identity? What was his ultimate goal? Despite his efforts, Yashimaru couldn't unravel the mystery. This puppet master didn't seem to belong to the village. But could any other village produce a puppet master of such skill? Or was he a rogue ninja, a deserter unaffiliated with Rasa's hidden plans? As Yashimaru was about to continue deducing Sasori's identity, Gaara stepped closer, his voice cold and commanding, "Uncle Yashimaru, tell me everything you know. Or you will regret it." After a busy day, the fourth Kazekage stretched his back and gazed into the distance. His eyes seemed to pierce through space, seeing Temari diligently training her wind-style ninjutsu at home, Kankuro engrossed in his study of puppetry, and Gaara undergoing a crucial test of his abilities. Temari, Kankuro, and Gaara each represented a distinct facet of Sunagakure's strength, and all were the children of the fourth Kazekage. Temari symbolized the traditional Sunagakure shinobi, adept in wind-style jutsu and direct combat techniques. She epitomized the mainstream type of shinobi that many in the village aspired to become. Kankuro represented the puppeteer's craft, a profession that didn't require elemental affinities but demanded mastery in chakra control and assassination skills. Although rare, puppeteers held a fearsome reputation on the battlefield. With sufficient puppet supplies, a single puppeteer could perform the work of several shinobi, maintaining battle readiness for extended periods and easing offensive pressure. Gaara, on the other hand, embodied the terrifying might of a Jinchuriki. Sunagakure was one of the first villages to utilize Jinchuriki as living weapons. In the vast deserts of the Land of Wind, Shikaku's overwhelming battlefield control made Sunagakure a force to reckon with. This power was a key reason why, despite losing battles, the village had never fallen. The fourth Kazekage believed that with strict guidance and thorough training, his 3 children would grow into formidable tools for the village. Once all 3 reached adulthood, he envisioned them as shadow-level powerhouses bound by blood ties, shinobi who would never betray him. At that point, he could break free of Konoha's shadow and elevate Sunagakure to the position of the most powerful hidden village. Pulling himself from these grandiose thoughts, the Kazekage sipped a strong coffee, preparing for another night of mining operations. The funds he accumulated would lay the foundation for Sunagakure's future dominance. At that moment, an Umbu operative hurried in and presented a message. "Kazekage-sama, this is a message from a merchant in the village. He wants to purchase a large quantity of our ore." "A big client?" The Kazekage licked his lips. He had been troubled by the surplus of ores in the village. If they couldn't be converted into funds, they would merely waste valuable storage space. But his attention soon shifted to the serpent-shaped emblem at the bottom right corner of the message, and his brow furrowed. Few shinobi in the ninja world used a serpent insignia. Among those, one figure stood out, Orochimaru, a former adversary he had encountered on the battlefield. In the past, Orochimaru had been a thorn in his side, complicating his plans. After Orochimaru's defection from Konoha, the Kazekage had privately reached out, attempting to recruit him into Sunagakure's fold. But Orochimaru had declined the offer. Now, with Orochimaru reaching out again, the Kazekage couldn't help but wonder about his true intentions. "What is that snake up to this time?" he muttered, suspicion flashing in his eyes. Still, after some thought, he decided to meet Orochimaru. Shrewd and treacherous as Orochimaru was, the man had one undeniable advantage: he was wealthy. Chapter 309: The Tiger Leaves the Mountain. Under the cover of night, the fourth Kazekage departed Sunagakure and arrived at the appointed sand dune. There, he saw the figure of someone who seemed to be Orochimaru. Upon closer inspection, his brows furrowed. The chakra and aura undoubtedly belonged to Orochimaru, yet the appearance and even the gender were wrong. The Orochimaru he knew was an androgynous man, but now the figure before him was clearly female. Noticing the Kazekage's expression, Orochimaru chuckled softly and said, "Long time no see, Kazekage-sama. You look even more composed than the last time we met. I almost didn't recognize you." The Kazekage's expression darkened as he frowned. "Orochimaru, your changes are quite different. Turning from a man into a woman, did you feel your male identity was holding you back? By the way, I am still straight." Orochimaru shook their head with a sly grin. "I wouldn't say that, but changing things up every now and then is refreshing. If Kazekage-sama ever wishes to explore such a transformation, I'd be more than happy to assist, free of charge." The Kazekage briefly imagined himself undergoing such a change and felt a shiver of disgust. As a proud man, the mere thought was repulsive, and he understood this as Orochimaru's subtle way of mocking him for being overly cautious and hesitant in his actions. With a cold snort, the Kazekage dismissed the remark. "Let's stick to business. In your letter, you mentioned purchasing a large quantity of Sunagakure's ore. What exactly do you plan to do with it?" "Forge weapons, create experimental instruments, and sell to other organizations. I have my hands in many endeavors." Orochimaru paused, then fixed the Kazekage with an amused glance. "But how I use the ore doesn't concern you. We're merely buyer and seller, nothing more." The Kazekage's gaze sharpened. "I doubt it's that simple. With your resources, buying refined metals would be more efficient. Why go out of your way to acquire raw ore from us?" Rasa then smirked. "Let me guess. You've hit a snag, haven't you? That's why you came to me." But let me tell you again. My offer from before still stands. Join Sunagakure, and I'll grant you a deputy's position and the village's protection." Orochimaru chuckled and shook their head. "I have no intention of joining Sunagakure. However, I will admit that recent troubles have made life inconvenient. Danzo's men constantly pursue me, destroying several of my bases in the Land of Fire. But this time, I've come to propose a collaboration. Let's meddle in the ongoing war between Iwagakure and Konoha." The Kazekage wasn't surprised by Orochimaru's rejection. Someone like Orochimaru, who had the nerve to defect from Konoha, would never willingly live under another's rule. His repeated offers to recruit Orochimaru were more about humiliating a former adversary. In truth, if Orochimaru ever did agree to join Sunagakure, the Kazekage would have to assign significant manpower just to monitor him. Any leaks of such an alliance would also provoke Konoha's ire, creating more problems than benefits. The mention of collaboration piqued the Kazekage's interest, but it also made him cautious. "Are you planning to help Iwagakure against Konoha or seize the opportunity to strike at Konoha yourself?" Orochimaru's ambiguous plans left him pondering. If this partnership couldn't aid Sunagakure in breaking free from its shackles, any actions taken would be trivial in the grand scheme of things. "What's in it for Sunagakure?" the Kazekage finally asked. Orochimaru smiled knowingly. "Freedom from your alliance with Konoha and the power to control the daimyo of the Land of Wind. These past years since the Third Shinobi War, the daimyo has been giving Sunagakure nothing but trouble, hasn't he?" The words hit a nerve, causing the Kazekage couldn't help but press further. "How do you plan to help us sever our ties with Konoha and gain control over the daimyo?" Orochimaru's grin widened. "It's simple. If the daimyo faces a life-threatening crisis, Sunagakure will have every reason to intervene. Once you've rescued him, you can either detain or monitor him at your leisure." The Kazekage's eyes glinted with understanding, and he let out a low chuckle. "You're not worried I'll take this method and have my people stage an attack on the daimyo without involving you?" Orochimaru shook their head, unfazed. "Other than me, no one else has the capability to assist you in subjugating the daimyo. And if our talks fall apart, I'll personally ensure the daimyo doesn't live to see another sunrise." The Kazekage's gaze turned sharp and dangerous at Orochimaru's threat, a tense silence hanging in the air. The fourth Kazekage understood that Orochimaru wasn't merely bluffing. Orochimaru indeed had both the means and motive to assassinate the daimyo. Should chaos erupt on the daimyo's end, the entire Land of Wind would descend into disorder. In such a scenario, Konoha would undoubtedly interfere with the Land of Wind's affairs. However, if Orochimaru were the perpetrator, the outcome would be entirely different. To avoid suspicion, Konoha would willingly abstain from meddling in the Land of Wind's internal issues. Furthermore, Sunagakure could leverage the moral high ground to pressure Konoha diplomatically. After a moment's contemplation, the Kazekage spoke. "I must admit, your proposal is tempting. But more than the benefits to Sunagakure, I'm curious, what's in it for you? If you stand to gain nothing, I'd find it hard to trust even the infamous Orochimaru." Orochimaru paused for a second, his expression darkening as bloodlust flickered in his eyes. His voice grew low and menacing. "I want to eliminate Danzo for betraying me and prove to Hiruzen Sarutobi that I am the rightful candidate for the position of Hokage. Losing to Minato Namikaze was one thing, but even after Minato's death, he clings stubbornly to the title." Seeing the fierce determination in Orochimaru's eyes, the Kazekage began to believe him. He realized this partnership was no mere lip service. Orochimaru was genuinely committed to their collaboration. As someone who had himself aspired to power, the Kazekage understood Orochimaru's resentment well. Before becoming the fourth Kazekage, he had set his sights on the position. After the third Kazekage's untimely death, he had invested considerable effort and paid a steep price to defeat his rival, Pakura, ultimately sending her to the Pure Land. Sympathizing with Orochimaru's ambition, the Kazekage saw an opportunity to use him to achieve his own goals. After composing himself, Orochimaru looked at the Kazekage and said, "Kazekage-sama, partnering with me will prove to be the wisest decision you've made. For now, though, let's start with the first step, mineral trade. I've heard much about the land of winds abundant or reserves. If the quality is as good as claimed, we can proceed with our first collaboration. The Kazekage gestured for Orochimaru to follow and smiled. The quality of Sunagakure's ore is impeccable. Come with me to the mines, and you'll see for yourself. Chapter 310, The Rampaging Gaara. Assassination was not my uncle's intention. Uncle Yashimaru loves me. The real mastermind behind this attempt is none other than the fourth Kazekage, my father. Under Sasori's coercion, Yashimaru revealed the truth behind the assassination attempt. Upon learning the truth, Gaara's emotions did not stabilize, instead, they spiraled further into chaos. It wasn't Yashimaru who deemed Gaara's birth a curse, but rather the fourth Kazekage, Rasa. Furthermore, all the assassination attempts over the years had been ordered by Rasa. As these thoughts churned in his mind, Gaara let out a cold laugh, recalling every interaction he had with Rasa. Since childhood, Rasa had never shown him kindness. Not only had he imposed severe training regimens on Gaara, but he had also forbidden Gaara from addressing him as father in public, insisting on Kazekage-sama instead. In his naivety, Gaara had thought this was Rasa's way of being impartial. Now, it was clear, Rasa had never regarded him as a son but merely as a weapon for the village. As a Jinchuriki, his successes were expected, and his failures only raised the question of replacing him. Under Gaara's piercing gaze, Yashimaru regretted revealing the truth. Gaara was teetering on the brink of losing control, his remaining sanity was hanging by a thread. If Yashimaru had chosen to take his own life earlier, Gaara would have remained unaware of the truth, continuing to trust Rasa and live on as a Jinchuriki. Sasori, too, was visibly affected as he listened to the account. Having experienced parental love and care in his childhood, he was shocked to witness such cruelty, a father turning his own child into a Jinchuriki and making contingency plans to replace him, even sending assassins after him. This thought softened Sasori's gaze toward Gaara. This was a child far more tragic than himself. Though Sasori had lost his parents, he knew their love was real. It was only due to misfortune that he had lost them. Gaara's pain, however, stemmed from his closest kin. Kneeling down, Sasori extended his metallic hand to pat Gaara's head, attempting to soothe his unstable emotions. However, Sasori found himself at a loss for words. Having never comforted anyone before, he could only awkwardly mutter, "Gaara, at least someone other than Rasa still loves you." Unfortunately, Gaara was too far gone to hear Sasori's words. Losing control of his emotions, Shikaku seized the opportunity to take over. As Shikaku's chakra poured out like a torrential flood, Gaara instinctively resorted to self-sealing, losing consciousness. With Gaara's body now under Shikaku's control, the beast roared with laughter as its form expanded to over 30 meters tall in mere seconds. Glaring down at Yashimaru and Sasori, Shikaku sneered, "Thanks for breaking this brat's spirit. Now that I have control, I'll reward you with a painless death." Before finishing its sentence, Shikaku raised its massive hand and smashed it down, creating a localized sandstorm. Yashimaru, unwilling to face the attack head-on, cast a wind-based technique to lighten himself and leaped several hundred meters away. Sasori, however, did not retreat. He maneuvered Hiriko to leap onto Shikaku's arm, climbing rapidly to its head. There, he pried open Shikaku's skull and stuffed several puppets loaded with explosive tags inside. Boom! A chain of explosions erupted from within Shikaku, creating shockwaves that shook its massive body. Its form visibly shrank as it reeled from the impact. Realizing Sasori's strength, Shikaku became cautious. This puppet master was no ordinary shinobi, he posed a genuine threat. Shikaku understood it needed to take the fight seriously and escape Sunagakure before more reinforcements arrived. Recalling its last defeat at the hands of Sunagakure's magnet release users, Shikaku resolved not to be captured again. Channeling its chakra, Shikaku formed hand signs and unleashed a powerful wind release technique. Though small compared to its colossal form, the winds it summoned were equivalent to a Category 8 typhoon, capable of raising sandstorms and slicing through stone. Frowning, Sasori retrieved a second scroll and summoned over 20 puppets, each capable of using ninjutsu to bridge the gap in size and power. With a single thought, Sasori commanded the puppets to unleash a barrage of ninjutsu. The battlefield erupted into a flurry of elemental attacks, with Sasori and Shikaku locked in an even match. Witnessing this, Yashimaru stood dumbfounded. He had assumed this mysterious puppet master's strength to be on par with an elite jonin, impressive, but not extraordinary. Yet, Sasori had exceeded all expectations, holding his own against a tailed beast. What astonished Yashimaru even more was the sheer number of puppets Sasori controlled, over 20. This was a feat even Elder Chiyo had never achieved, rivaled only by the legendary puppet master Monzaemon. Could such a prodigy exist in the shinobi world? A name flashed in Yashimaru's mind, a prodigy listed among Sunagakure's missing nin. The boy's name was Sasori, grandson of Elder Chiyo, who had broken numerous records as a puppet master. Could this be the same Sasori? But wasn't Sasori a handsome young boy? How had he turned into a bald, middle-aged man? And why had Sasori suddenly returned to the village, contacting Gaara without alerting anyone? Could he be plotting to dethrone Rasa? As these thoughts swirled, Yashimaru resolved to flee. He needed to spread word of these events, summoning reinforcements and informing Elder Chiyo of the situation. However, just as Yashimaru prepared to leave, Byakuya placed a firm hand on his shoulder and said calmly, "Sunagakure's shinobi aren't blind or deaf. They're already on their way to assist Sasori. For now, stay and watch this battle. A fight of this caliber is a rare spectacle for someone like you." Chapter 311, The Scorpion in Adversity. Yashimaru spun around sharply, breaking out in a cold sweat upon spotting Byakuya. He had no idea who this person was, but one thing was certain, they were definitely not a sand ninja. Most likely, this individual was a companion of Sasori. Judging by their composed demeanor, they were highly probable at Kage-level strength. In the presence of such a powerful individual, Yashimaru realized he had no chance to resist or escape. All he could do was obediently follow the stranger's instructions and witness this rare battle unfold. While watching the fight, Yashimaru couldn't help but glance back at Byakuya repeatedly. He felt a sense of relief every time he realized Byakuya wasn't paying him any attention. Meanwhile, he began speculating about the identity of this mysterious young man. On the other hand, Byakuya also noticed Yashimaru's glances but paid them no mind. The reason Byakuya had asked Yashimaru to stay was primarily to ensure that he wouldn't be killed in the aftermath of the battle. For someone of jonin-level strength, in a fight between Sasori and Shikaku, he was little more than a somewhat sturdier pawn. Moreover, once Sasori became the 5th Kazekage, he would need a jonin to handle day-to-day matters. Otherwise, given Sasori's personality, he would inevitably abandon the duties of the Kazekage and hide away in his lab to study puppetry. If that happened, Sunagakure would no longer be able to consistently supply Byakuya with the rewards he desired. At this moment, Shikaku, who was battling Sasori, noticed Byakuya and Yashimaru. After taking a deep breath, Shikaku charged up and unleashed its drilling air bullet straight at them. Feeling the pressure rushing toward him, Yashimaru closed his eyes. It would be nearly impossible to dodge Shikaku's attack with his abilities. The best he could do would be to endure it and suffer grave injuries. However, in the next moment, Yashimaru witnessed a scene that would be etched into his memory forever. Byakuya raised his hand and effortlessly caught Shikaku's drilling air bullet. Then, as if nothing had happened, he sat back down on the cliffside, continuing to leisurely observe the battle. A dumbfounded Yashimaru approached Byakuya and stammered, "You just caught Shikaku's attack, an attack strong enough to destroy boulders, with your bare hand?" Byakuya glanced at Yashimaru and replied calmly, "Is Shikaku really that strong? Heh, he's nothing more than a raccoon. No matter how much power he wields, he's still just a stupid beast." Hearing this, Yashimaru fell silent, unsure of how to respond. Shikaku was considered Sunagakure's strongest weapon. Every Kazekage in history had sought to control Shikaku, using its power to defeat the village's enemies. Yet here was someone dismissing the creature, which Sunagakure revered as their greatest asset, as nothing more than a foolish beast. Yashimaru couldn't tell if his understanding was too narrow or if Byakuya's strength was beyond comprehension. But one thing was clear, tonight would mark a turning point for Sunagakure. Whether it was the mysterious puppet master, likely Sasori, or the enigmatic young man before him, their arrival would shatter the village's tranquility and plunge its future into uncertainty. As time passed, more and more sand ninja began to notice the commotion from Sasori and Shikaku's battle. Upon climbing onto the rooftop and witnessing the towering form of Shikaku, akin to a mountain, as well as Sasori battling it, the sand ninja were filled with confusion. First, they could confirm that the earth-tone monster was indeed their village's one-tailed beast, Shikaku. But wasn't Shikaku sealed inside Gaara? Why was it suddenly outside the village? Did Shikaku overtake Gaara's mind, or was there some other reason? Second, who was the ninja fighting Shikaku? It clearly wasn't the Kazekage, Rasa. With questions swirling in their minds, the sand ninja assembled a large group and advanced toward the battle site. Before long, they saw Sasori and Shikaku engaged in combat on the desert sands. Even from a considerable distance, they could clearly see Sasori and the numerous puppets he was controlling. The sight left the sand ninja even more puzzled. They didn't recognize this puppet master battling Shikaku, and the sheer number and quality of the puppets he wielded were beyond belief. Since when did puppets have the capability to battle a tailed beast? As the sand ninja wrestled with their doubts, Shikaku noticed them and began unleashing indiscriminate wind-release techniques in all directions as though chakra was of no consequence. Several sand ninjas, unable to react in time, were struck by the techniques and buried in the desert sands. With multiple comrades incapacitated, the remaining sand ninja grew serious. They realized they weren't dealing with an ordinary enemy but a tailed beast considered a force of nature. After a brief exchange of glances, they devised a strategy. One group would retreat to call for reinforcements, another would begin setting up a sealing formation at the site, and the remaining group would directly engage Shikaku to buy time. Setting up the sealing formation wouldn't take long, about 10 minutes, but that was more than enough time for Shikaku to kill them dozens of times over. As Shikaku's attacks neared the ninja preparing the formation, Sasori quickly deployed his puppets to intercept the attacks mid-air. Using chakra transmission, he then commanded, "You useless burdens, don't interfere with my battle against Shikaku. Get out of here, now!" Hearing this, the rescued sand ninja looked at Sasori with gratitude in their eyes before promptly retreating. Sasori was right, they were nothing but dead weight in this battle. However, they couldn't ignore a troubling fact: human chakra is limited, while a tailed beast's chakra is nearly infinite. Though the puppet master seemed capable of holding off Shikaku for now, he would undoubtedly tire as time passed, ultimately leading to his defeat. Thinking this, one of the sand ninjas shouted to Sasori, "Puppet master, retreat for now. If this continues, you won't last much longer. Once you fall, none of us will be able to stop Shikaku. Wait for Lord Kazekage to arrive, he'll definitely be able to handle Shikaku." "You mean that coward, the fourth Kazekage? I don't need Raza's help. Let him stay in the mines, clinging to his impossible dreams." Sasori of the red sand snorted coldly, his tone dripping with disdain for the fourth Kazekage. Hearing this, the surrounding sand ninja exchanged uneasy glances. They didn't recognize this puppet master, but from his words, it was clear he harbored significant resentment toward Rasa. Could he be one of Chiyo's subordinates or perhaps a member of another faction? Seizing the moment when Sasori was distracted, Shikaku swept up all the puppets on the ground and buried them hundreds of meters underground. The immense pressure crushed them all into oblivion. Having lost a large number of puppets in an instant, Sasori's expression turned grim. Without utilizing magnet release, he truly wasn't a match for Shikaku. Neither his human puppets nor mechanical puppets could withstand the catastrophic power of the tailed beast. But deploying his Kazekage puppet now would expose the fact that he had assassinated the third Kazekage. After a moment of deliberation, he pulled out the scroll containing the Kazekage puppet. His decision stemmed partly from a desire to demonstrate his strength and free Gaara from Shikaku's control. It was also rooted in his trust in Byakuya. He believed in Byakuya's judgment and was convinced that if Byakuya intended for him to become the Kazekage of Sunagakure, then he was destined to be the 5th Kazekage. Chapter 312, The Touching Reunion of Grandmother and Grandson. After summoning the Kazekage puppet, Sasori utilized magnet release to manipulate the iron sand buried within the earth. The iron sand quickly infiltrated Shikaku's body, rendering the previously nimble beast sluggish. Even basic movements became a struggle. "You've mastered magnet release too?" Shikaku's expression darkened upon sensing the change in his body. As a tailed beast nearly invincible in the desert, there were few things Shikaku feared. Chief among them were the sealing techniques of the Temple of Wind and the magnet release wielded by successive Kazekages. The former could seal him away unconditionally, while the latter made him unbearably heavy and ultimately led to his capture. Thus, Shikaku was in a foul mood when he recognized magnet release. After finally gaining a chance to escape, he had barely begun to savor his freedom in the desert when he encountered a magnet release user determined to seal him away again. But Shikaku wasn't the only one wearing a grim expression. The Sand Ninja were equally troubled. When Sasori revealed the Kazekage puppet, the ninjas quickly recognized its origin. This was no ordinary puppet but a rare human puppet, capable of performing ninjutsu because it was crafted from a real body. In the entire ninja world, there were very few magnet release users, and even fewer who had left behind usable remains. The last known ninja to disappear with magnet release was none other than the 3rd Kazekage. Coupled with the familiar puppet-making techniques on display, they soon connected the dots to Sasori, the once brilliant puppet master. The Sand Ninja felt grateful that Sasori had stepped forward to protect the village in its moment of crisis. But why had Sasori, missing for so many years, suddenly returned to the village, and with the 3rd Kazekage's human puppet? Could it be confirmed now that Sasori was behind the 3rd Kazekage's disappearance? Sasori noticed the cold stares directed at him but paid them no mind. His focus was entirely on manipulating the Kazekage puppet to seal Shikaku's chakra back into Gaara. Before long, Shikaku's enormous form gradually shrank until it finally disappeared into Gaara's body. Sasori lifted the unconscious Gaara and looked at the Sand Ninja blocking his path before saying coldly, "Why are you standing in my way? If you want to attack me, go ahead. But anyone who dares to strike me will be treated as an enemy, and I won't show mercy to enemies." The Sand Ninja didn't move aside. Maki, the leading jonin, directly confronted him. "Sasori, we're grateful you subdued the rampaging Shikaku, but don't you think you owe us an explanation for this magnet release puppet?" Sasori furrowed his brows and replied, "What's there to explain? This is a human puppet, something you consider taboo, and it's crafted from the body of the 3rd Kazekage." "The 3rd Kazekage?" Maki's suspicions were confirmed. He glared at Sasori in anger. "So it really was you? How did you kill the 3rd Kazekage back then? Do you realize your actions caused immense suffering for the entire village?" Sasori glanced at Maki and then began walking toward the other side of the crowd. He had no interest in explaining himself to these Sand Ninjas. Those who didn't attack him would be ignored, those who did would be dealt with mercilessly. His silence made the Sand Ninjas' expressions even more tense, their gazes filled with murderous intent as they watched his retreating figure. But Sasori's earlier display of strength, subduing a rampaging tailed beast, made them hesitate. If he could handle Shikaku, dealing with them would be child's play. Even Maki hesitated. Though he was a loyal confidant of the 4th Kazekage and knew stopping Sasori would earn him praise, he wasn't willing to throw his life away. Just as Sasori was about to leave, a group of people appeared to block his path. If it had been anyone else, Sasori might have ignored them or attacked outright. But this time, the person standing before him was none other than Chiyo, the elder of Sunagakure. Chiyo was the village's most skilled puppet master and Sasori's grandmother. 10 minutes earlier, Sunagakure's Umbu had realized Shikaku was rampaging and sought the 4th Kazekage's help, only to find he wasn't in his office. Left with no choice, they turned to Chiyo, who was living in retirement outside the village. Upon hearing about Shikaku's rampage, Chiyo immediately donned her ninja gear and rushed to the village. She arrived to find the battle already over, with Shikaku resealed. Initially, she assumed it was Rasa who had sealed Shikaku. After all, Rasa was the only ninja in the village capable of suppressing and sealing Shikaku. However, upon reaching the scene, she discovered the one responsible was an unfamiliar puppet master wielding a magnet-release puppet. More importantly, this puppet was a human puppet. Chiyo quickly deduced that the puppet's material was none other than the long-missing third Kazekage. These suspicions had lingered in her mind ever since the simultaneous disappearance of Sasori and the third Kazekage. She had refused to believe her once sweet grandson would kill the third Kazekage, especially given his abilities at the time. But the reality was often cruel. Her grandson had killed the third Kazekage and now stood before them with the puppet as proof. The two locked eyes before Sasori stopped in his tracks and, feigning indifference, said, "Elder Chiyo, are you here to stop me too?" Chiyo chuckled coldly and replied, "Elder Chiyo? Sasori, has 10 years been enough for you to forget the manners I taught you?" Unfazed, Sasori responded, "Old hag, even after all this time, you're still meddling in my affairs. Do you think you're any different from those fools who want to fight me?" "I'm not going to fight you," Chiyo said, glancing at the unconscious Gaara in Sasori's arms. "But why are you holding Sunagakure's Jinchuriki hostage?" "Hostage?" Sasori scoffed, tossing Gaara to Chiyo. "I was protecting him. If it weren't for me, the Jinchuriki would already be dead." "Protecting him?" Chiyo raised a brow. "Since when does the Jinchuriki need your protection? Sunagakure can safeguard its own Jinchuriki. By the way, you're not leading yet, I have many questions for you." Still as nagging as ever, old hag, Sasori muttered, though he paused. Pointing to a nearby direction, he added, "If you doubt me, ask a ninja named Yashimaru. He just attempted to assassinate the Jinchuriki under orders from the Kazekage." Chapter 313, The Third Kazekage's Resolve and Sasori's Struggles. The fourth Kazekage issued an order to Yashimaru to assassinate the Jinchuriki, Gaara. Hearing this, Elder Chiyo and the gathered Saiyan shinobi froze momentarily before they displayed expressions of disbelief. Who was Gaara? Beyond being the one-tailed Jinchuriki, he was the fourth Kazekage's son. How could the Kazekage give such an order, especially against his own child, a Jinchuriki vital to the village? And as for the assassin? The choice seemed even more absurd. Everyone in Sunagakure knew Yashimaru was Karura's brother, Gaara's uncle. How could he possibly undertake a mission to kill the Jinchuriki? Rejecting Sasori's statement outright, the Saiyan shinobi quickly concocted their own theory. The assassin targeting Gaara tonight couldn't be anyone else, it must have been Sasori himself. Perhaps an unexpected event during the attempt caused Shikaku to momentarily break free, leading to the earlier battle. Sasori's earlier words were likely fabricated lies, made on the spot to evade capture. Elder Chiyo shared similar suspicions. However, after Sasori handed over Gaara, she started to doubt her assumptions. Could it be that Sasori wasn't here for the Jinchuriki at all and had simply returned to the village out of curiosity? After all, if Sasori truly intended to target Shikaku, he wouldn't need to confront it head-on. Nor would he expose the Kazekage puppet, risking unnecessary danger. Still, Elder Chiyo was not sure about letting Sasori leave the village. Sasori's presence was riddled with too many mysteries. Where had he been all these years? Why had he turned the Kazekage into a puppet? Why had he infiltrated the village? These questions demanded answers. Elder Chiyo looked at Sasori and said, "I'll send it to Yashimaru to determine whether your story holds any truth." Sasori scoffed, replying, "What does it matter if it's true or false? Do you really intend to let me leave Sunagakure?" Chiyo faltered. No matter the truth, she had no intention of allowing Sasori, who had been absent from the village for years, to walk away freely. As Chiyo hesitated to respond, several Saiyan shinobi arrived with Yashimaru in tow. Clearing her throat, Chiyo turned to Yashimaru and asked, "I ask you, did you come here tonight to assassinate the Jinchuriki, Gaara?" Yashimaru froze, unsure how to respond. Telling the truth would tarnish the fourth Kazekage's image and possibly invite his wrath on both himself and Gaara. Lying, however, would weigh on his conscience and might still lead to Sasori targeting Gaara in the future. Sasori clearly had the capability to kill the Jinchuriki if he so desired. As Yashimaru wrestled with his decision, his eyes caught sight of White Knight, disguised among the crowd. Taking a deep breath, he answered, "Elder Chiyo, I was indeed carrying out a mission to deal with Gaara." Chiyo narrowed her eyes and extended her chakra strings, binding Yashimaru. "Who sent you to deal with Gaara?" Noticing White Knight disappear into the crowd, Yashimaru felt emboldened and revealed, "It was Lord Forth. He ordered me to use assassination as a means to awaken Gaara's potential. If Gaara couldn't wield Shikaku's power, he was to be killed." Chiyo frowned. Her chakra strings told her Yashimaru wasn't lying. But why would Raza send someone to assassinate Gaara? And why hadn't Yashimaru refused such a mission? She looked at Yashimaru again, and he remained silent, as if sensing her thoughts. With a heavy sigh, Chiyo thought back to her understanding of Raza's character. If this was the truth, it was entirely plausible. Raza was the type of ninja who would sacrifice anything for the sake of the village. To Raza, whether it was an ordinary shinobi or his own child, they were all part of Sunagakure. They could be abandoned or sacrificed whenever necessary. But to deliberately send someone to assassinate Gaara as a way of forcing him to adapt to Shikaku's power? Such actions were outrageous. If something had gone wrong with Gaara, leading to Shikaku breaking free, the resulting chaos would rival the Nine-Tails rampage in the Hidden Leaf. After a long silence, Sasori spoke calmly, "Old woman, does this prove my innocence? I had no intention of targeting the Jinchuriki. It was Gaara who lost control and sought me out." Without waiting for a reply, Sasori turned and walked toward the chamber where Gaara was confined, locking himself inside. Chiyo opened her mouth, wanting to apologize to Sasori, but the words wouldn't come. She'd never been skilled at communicating with her grandson and couldn't understand his thoughts. Even if Sasori hadn't attacked Gaara this time, there were still the unresolved matters of his disappearance and the Kazekage puppet. Sasori was, after all, still a sand shinobi. Fortunately, Sasori hadn't left the village, merely isolating himself in his usual manner. As Sasori shut himself in the chamber, the sand shinobi exchanged complicated looks, beginning to doubt their earlier accusations. Was Sasori truly the one who killed the third Kazekage? Could there be another explanation for his actions? Sensing the shift in mood, White Knight, disguised as a sand ninja, spoke up. "Everyone, could it be that we've misunderstood Sasori? Just because the Kazekage puppet is in his possession doesn't necessarily mean he killed the third Kazekage. What if there were other circumstances at play?" Other circumstances? White Knight's question spurred the shinobi to ponder alternative scenarios. "I wonder," White Knight continued, "if perhaps Sasori and the third Kazekage faced a powerful enemy together. After a grueling battle, they managed to repel the threat, but the third Kazekage succumbed to his injuries. In his final moments, the third Kazekage might have requested Sasori to turn him into a puppet. That way, even in death, he could continue to protect Sunagakure." White Knight's suggestion struck a chord. Although the creation of human puppets was taboo, the third Kazekage was known as a selfless leader. It wasn't inconceivable that he would make such a request for the sake of the village. One by one, the sand shinobi began nodding, considering this unexpected but strangely plausible possibility. Chapter 314, We've Come at the Wrong Time. Byakuya's conjecture caused a stir among the sand shinobi. Under normal circumstances, upon seeing the Kazekage puppet, the sand shinobi would have immediately pursued Sasori as the killer of the third Kazekage. They wouldn't have entertained Byakuya's speculations or analysis. However, moments ago, Sasori had defeated the rampaging Jinchuriki, saving the village from Shikaku's wrath. If Sasori hadn't needed to use the Kazekage puppet to overcome Shikaku, he wouldn't have been surrounded by the crowd in the first place. Given these considerations, doubt began to creep into their minds. Byakuya's theories seemed increasingly plausible, as if they had uncovered the hidden truth of the past. Could this really have been the long-buried truth? Perhaps Sasori and the third Kazekage had both been ambushed. Maybe the third Kazekage had willingly allowed Sasori to turn him into a puppet to protect the village. Hearing the murmurs among the crowd, even Elder Chiyo began to question whether this could be true. After all, compared to the belief that her grandson had murdered the third Kazekage and become a heinous rogue ninja, Chiyo preferred to think of him as a good person. However, another pressing question soon arose. If Sasori was truly innocent, why hadn't he returned to the village all these years? Why had he stood by as Sunagakure suffered defeats in the Third Great Ninja War, ultimately becoming a subordinate village to Sunagakure? Byakuya didn't answer these questions directly. His goal wasn't to provide a definitive answer but to guide the Sand Shinobi and Elder Chiyo into drawing their own conclusions. Only by arriving at their own answers would they wholeheartedly believe them. Still, Byakuya found himself wondering if there was any truth to his fabricated story. Once this matter was resolved, he thought, he would have to ask Sasori directly. Could it be that Sasori and the third Kazekage had truly been ambushed together back then? Did Sasori really possess the strength to kill the strongest Kazekage at the time? The Sand Shinobi, meanwhile, began speculating among themselves. Some suspected Konoha was responsible for the third Kazekage's disappearance. After all, considering the outcome of the war, Konoha had gained the most from the Sand's losses. Others thought Sunagakure might be the culprit. Sunagakure, Cloud Village, had been the first to attack the Sand during the war and had a history of underhanded tactics and surprise attacks. It was the most opportunistic of the ninja villages. Still, others pointed fingers at Iwagakure and Kirigakure. Iwagakure's Inoki, as well as their Four Tails and Five Tails Jinchuriki, were formidable forces capable of killing the third Kazekage. As for the Kirigakure, their 7 ninja swordsmen were a notorious team specializing in targeting Kage-level shinobi. The debates went on for a long time, but no one could come to a definitive conclusion. For now, their only course of action was to keep monitoring Gaara and Sasori while awaiting the arrival of the 4th Kazekage to make the final decision. After all, the Kazekage was the highest authority in Sunagakure, and though Elder Chiyo was highly respected, she had long since retired. Half an hour passed, but Elder Chiyo and the Sand Shinobi still saw no sign of the 4th Kazekage. This absence filled them with unease, sparking fears that he might have met with misfortune. It brought to mind the mysterious disappearance of both the 3rd Kazekage and Sasori years ago, which had ultimately resulted in the confirmation of their deaths. After a moment of contemplation, Elder Chiyo addressed the surrounding shinobi, "Stay here and keep a close watch on Sasori. If you encounter danger, don't hesitate to flee. I'll take a team to search for Raza and have him come to take charge." With that, Elder Chiyo led a squad of Sand Umbu out of the area. Despite searching Sunagakure for over 10 minutes, they failed to find any trace of the 4th Kazekage. Chiyo's expression grew darker by the minute. She began to fear that Raza might soon meet the same fate as the 3rd Kazekage. Elder Chiyo couldn't help but worry that this might all be a ploy by Sasori, a diversion using Shikaku's rampage to draw their attention while others targeted the 4th Kazekage. If that were the case, what would become of Sunagakure's future? The 4th Kazekage was the last shinobi truly qualified to hold the Kazekage title. Any successor, though nominally Kazekage, would struggle to halt the village's decline and might not even gain the approval of its jonin. At that moment, a Sand Umbu by Chiyo's side spoke up, "Elder Chiyo, at this time of day, could it be that Kazekage-sama is at the mines? All of the village's finances come from him personally overseeing the mining operations." "The mines?" Chiyo paused, her expression turning a bit strange. She couldn't fathom the Kazekage's priorities. How could he remain at the mines when the village was dealing with a rampaging tailed beast? The Sand Umbu continued, "Elder Chiyo, if Kazekage-sama really is in the mines, he might not have heard anything from the village. After all, it's more than 20 kilometers away." Chiyo's expression softened somewhat, and she responded, "I see. Then lead the way. If it's for the sake of the village's finances, I have no reason to blame him." The Umbu nodded and began heading toward the mines, with Chiyo casting one last glance toward the distant mining area before following closely behind. Before long, the group arrived at the mines. Just as Elder Chiyo was preparing to descend into the mine with the others, they were met with an astonishing sight that made them all frown. At the mines, after inspecting the stockpile of ore, Orochimaru nodded in satisfaction and turned to the fourth Kazekage, saying, "Kazekage-sama, I hadn't expected the quality of your villages ore to be even better than I imagined. Across the entire ninja world, ore of this caliber might only be surpassed by that of the Land of Iron. The magnetic release bloodline limit is truly enviable, isn't it?" Seeing Orochimaru's interest in the ore, the fourth Kazekage smiled in response. "We're just making an honest living, nothing compared to the sharp mind of someone like you, Orochimaru-sama. I've heard that many of the great merchants in the ninja world operate under your backing." At that moment, Orochimaru received a message from Byakuya, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. He extended his hand toward the fourth Kazekage and said, "Profit is profit, no need to call it a hardship. To show my sincerity, I'm willing to purchase your villages or at 10% above market price. I hope this marks the start of a pleasant cooperation." "An extra 10%? Then I look forward to a fruitful partnership." The fourth Kazekage quickly extended his hand in return. He knew Orochimaru's true intent was to secure Sunagakure village's support for future operations against Konoha. But Orochimaru's offer was too tempting to refuse. With his backing, the village would be able to train more ninja in the coming years. One day, they could join forces with Orochimaru to strike at Konoha and break free from its control. At that moment, Elder Chiyo and her group of Saiyan shinobi arrived at the mine entrance. The sight of the fourth Kazekage and Orochimaru shaking hands caused Chiyo's expression to darken instantly. Chapter 315, Raza, the Honest Man. Before arriving at the mines, Elder Chiyo and the Saiyan shinobi had imagined various scenarios of meeting the fourth Kazekage. Although Raza ruled the village with an iron hand, his dedication to the village was beyond question. Not only had he never used his position for personal gain, but he had even exploited his magnet release to mine resources and fill the financial gaps of Sunagakure. A Kazekage of such integrity was a rarity in the ninja world. Thus, as long as Raza did nothing to overtly threaten the village, Elder Chiyo and the Jonin were willing to turn a blind eye to his autocratic ways. They had even tacitly allowed him to eliminate Yakura, a political rival. However, upon arriving at the mines, they were confronted with an unimaginable scene. In a time of crisis for the village, the Kazekage, Raza, was caught meeting in secret with a ninja from another village, Orochimaru, a former enemy of the Sand, also known as the Cold Lord. In the last Ninja World War, Orochimaru led the forces that defeated Sunagakure, forcing them into submission. Now, witnessing Raza chatting and laughing with Orochimaru made them question the events of that war. Could it be that Raza and Orochimaru had always been on such good terms? If their suspicions were correct, what had the war between Konoha and Sunagakure really been about? Under the watchful eyes of the gathered Saiyan shinobi, Raza's face turned visibly awkward. He quickly withdrew his hand from Orochimaru's grip, fixing him with a sharp glare as though attempting to deflect attention. Inwardly, Raza was perplexed. Wasn't this supposed to be a secret meeting with Orochimaru? How had Elder Chiyo found him here? Could there be a mole among his subordinates? If so, a thorough purge of the Umbu would be necessary once he returned. Orochimaru, glancing at Elder Chiyo and the others, smirked faintly. "Kazekage-sama, it seems your control over your subordinates is lacking. If that's the case, I may have to reconsider our cooperation." "Shut up." Raza's face darkened as he retorted. He was already debating whether to make a move against Orochimaru. Unlike other village leaders, Orochimaru was not only responsible for the deaths of many Saiyan shinobi but also a rogue ninja from their ally, Konoha, a highly sensitive and dangerous individual. Orochimaru, sensing Raza's intent, silently stepped back. Having accomplished his goal, he had no intention of lingering and used his great snake substitution technique to retreat deeper into the mines. With Orochimaru gone, the awkwardness surrounding Raza only deepened. Forcing himself to remain composed, Raza approached Elder Chiyo and the others, asking, "Elder Chiyo, why have you suddenly come to the mines? Did something happen in the village?" Elder Chio fixed Raza with a piercing gaze and replied coldly, "If I hadn't come, I wouldn't have witnessed Kazekage-sama meeting with Orochimaru. Might I ask what important matters you were discussing?" Hearing the accusatory tone, Raza chose to explain honestly, "Orochimaru is a buyer for our ore. I brought him here to inspect the quality. Beyond that, we discussed interfering in the war between Iwagakure and Sunagakure. Look, while the Konoha is our ally, their restrictions on us are too severe. And so, we need to secure more favorable terms for the village and gradually free ourselves from their influence." Having spoken his mind, Raza looked at Elder Chio, hoping for understanding. After all, Chio had been instrumental in elevating him to the Kazekage position. She should comprehend his motives, as they were always for the benefit of Sunagakure. Elder Chio listened intently before asking, "I believe your explanation. However, when did this cooperation with Orochimaru begin?" Failing to catch the underlying suspicion, Raza answered earnestly, "We've been in contact before, but this is our first official collaboration. Orochimaru's status as a rogue ninja makes it tricky if Konoha finds out. So, this isn't the first time." Elder Chio nodded thoughtfully while the surrounding Sand Shinobi began exchanging uneasy glances. Their perception of Raza had shifted dramatically. It turned out that while they had been fighting life-and-death battles on the front lines, their Kazekage had been secretly colluding with Orochimaru. No wonder the war between the Sunagakure and Sunagakure had ended so abruptly. No wonder the village had been forced to sign those blatantly exploitative treaties. So, everything seemed to boil down to a deal between the fourth Kazekage and Orochimaru. But why did Raza agree to such terms? The answer was obvious: to secure his position as the fourth Kazekage and establish himself as the sole ruler of Sunagakure. At that moment, the Sand Shinobi were reminded of the third Kazekage's disappearance and their earlier discussions about the puppet of the third Kazekage and Sasori of the Red Sand. Their expressions became increasingly complicated. They couldn't help but wonder why Sasori hadn't returned to Sunagakure all these years. If Raza had attacked both Sasori and the third Kazekage back then, everything would start to make sense. Raza, being a master of magnet release, would have had the capability to assassinate the third Kazekage. After Raza had gravely injured the third Kazekage, leaving him on the brink of death, the third Kazekage might have encountered Sasori. Sasori, realizing that Raza was the true perpetrator, likely chose not to return to the village because he lacked the strength to confront him. Instead, Sasori bided his time in the ninja world, lying low for years. Now, having turned the third Kazekage into a puppet and possessing the strength to contend with Raza, Sasori might have finally decided to return, searching for an opportunity to topple Raza from the shadows. With these speculations, even without concrete evidence, the Sand Shinobi began to doubt the fourth Kazekage. After all, Raza himself had admitted to collaborating with Orochimaru, and their ears and eyes couldn't deceive them simultaneously. It was at this point that Raza finally sensed something was amiss. Frowning, he demanded, "What are those expressions on your faces? Do you suspect that I've been colluding with Orochimaru for a long time, betraying the interests of the village?" "Heh! I am the Kazekage of Sunagakure. How could I possibly betray the village?" The Sand Shinobi exchanged glances, refraining from openly rebuking Raza but also making no effort to dispel their suspicions. Never before had Raza seen such expressions on his subordinates' faces, nor could he understand what had caused such a change. His face grew darker as he turned to Elder Chio, questioning sharply, "Elder Chio, what on earth has happened in the village for you to mobilize like this? Did the Sunagakure launch an attack during my absence?" "That's not the case." Elder Chio shook her head before continuing, "But just a moment ago, Gaara was attacked and went berserk in the village. The attacker's identity is quite unusual. It was Yashimaru." The old veteran folded her arms before raising a brow. "According to Yashimaru's testimony, the order to assassinate Gaara came from you. Raza, do you realize your actions nearly caused a Shikaku rampage in the village?" Chapter 316, The Fourth Kazekage's Betrayal. What was Yashimaru doing, that useless fool? Failing to assassinate the Jinchuriki and causing him to go berserk was one thing, But how did he still have the audacity to remain alive in the ninja world? Didn't he always claim to love Gaara the most? Yet, he couldn't even handle such a simple task. After silently cursing Yashimaru, the fourth Kazekage spoke sternly. Yes, it was my order to assassinate Gaara. His growth has been too slow. I wanted to stimulate his development through this method so that he could quickly become a qualified Jinchuriki and serve the village. In the fourth Kazekage's view, his actions might have been extreme, but they were far from wrong. Yashimaru was his direct subordinate, and Gaara was his son. He had absolute authority over both of them. Even if Gaara had been killed accidentally, it wouldn't have been a significant loss to the village. As for Gaara going berserk, that was even less of a problem. Today was an exception due to some delays. On any other day, if Gaara had gone out of control, he could have suppressed him at any time. However, after the fourth Kazekage explained his reasoning, the expressions of Chiyo and the others did not improve. They continued to stare at him with unwavering hostility in their eyes. The fourth Kazekage's cold-bloodedness terrified them. How could the fourth Kazekage so calmly issue such a cruel order, sending his wife's younger brother to assassinate his own son, simply because he was dissatisfied with his son's growth rate? To the shinobi of Sunagakure, such actions made the fourth Kazekage seem more like a monster than Gaara, more like a heartless beast than Shikaku itself. If the fourth Kazekage could sacrifice his son and brother-in-law for the sake of the village now, who's to say he wouldn't one day sacrifice them as well, ordering them to kill those they held dear under the pretext of serving the village? Moreover, his cold-blooded behavior only made him a more plausible suspect for the murder of the third Kazekage. Sighing deeply, Elder Chiyo looked at the fourth Kazekage and spoke wearily. So, Raza, you admit that you ordered Yashimaru to assassinate the Jinchuriki? The fourth Kazekage nodded, seeing no reason to deny it. Elder Chiyo continued, then, do you also admit to secretly collaborating with Orochimaru and conspiring with him 10 years ago to harm the third Kazekage? The fourth Kazekage nodded initially but then realized something was amiss and quickly retorted, Elder Chiyo, I merely had trade agreements with Orochimaru. When did I ever conspire against the third Kazekage? Not to mention that the third Kazekage is merely missing, not confirmed dead. When he disappeared, I was in the village the whole time. Why would I even have a reason to harm him? Have you been misled by someone? Elder Chiyo shook her head. No one misled me. This is the suspicion of myself and other jonin. As for whether the third Kazekage is missing or dead, you are the one who knows best. Elder Chiyo! This is slander, the fourth Kazekage roared furiously. Elder Chiyo gestured, and two Sunagakure shinobi approached the fourth Kazekage. Raza, you should return to the village with me. Some matters need investigation before any conclusions can be drawn. However, as of now, you remain the primary suspect in the disappearance of the third Kazekage. I will return to the village, but I have no obligation to prove my innocence, nor will I take responsibility for these baseless accusations, the fourth Kazekage said coldly. Golden sand began to form around him as he glanced at Chiyo. You'd better explain everything clearly, or I will act in the name of the Kazekage. Elder Chiyo stared deeply at the fourth Kazekage before signaling for Jonin Baki to step forward and provide clarification. Fourth Kazekage-sama, 2 hours ago, the village was attacked by Shikaku. No one was able to stop it. At the critical moment, it was Sasori who stepped forward and sealed Shikaku. Sasori? The fourth Kazekage was momentarily stunned. Sasori had been confirmed missing a long time ago. Moreover, Sasori was a puppet master. How could he have the power to seal Shikaku? And how did this incident connect him to the third Kazekage? Seeing the Kazekage's confusion, Jonin Baki continued, Fourth Kazekage-sama, Sasori used the third Kazekage puppet to seal Shikaku. Upon hearing this, the fourth Kazekage became even more puzzled. If Sasori possessed the Kazekage puppet, then Sasori should logically be the prime suspect in the murder of the third Kazekage. Why, then, was suspicion directed at him instead? Taking a deep breath, the fourth Kazekage asked, Where is Sasori now? Have you not tried to capture him? The Kazekage puppet is in his possession, he must be the murderer. Jonin Baki avoided meeting the 4th Kazekage's eyes as he replied, "4th Kazekage-sama, we initially thought the same." However, Sasori did not flee, nor did he show any intent to harm us. Additionally, he just saved the village. Thus, we believe Sasori might not necessarily be the murderer. If he truly were the culprit, why would he risk suspicion by using the Kazekage puppets so openly? Baki paused for a moment before continuing. The Jinchuriki's rampage wasn't caused by Sasori either, it was your doing. So now you suspect me to be the murderer? The 4th Kazekage was so enraged that even the gold dust around him began to tremble. He could barely control his chakra. Jonin Baki shook his head and said, "We do not directly suspect you. We just think Sasori isn't the killer. However, we overheard you conspiring with Orochimaru earlier, discussing deals that would harm the village's interests. You also admitted to privately collaborating with Orochimaru over the years. Thus..." At this point, Baki raised his head, his gaze firm as he concluded, "We suspect that you are the real murderer. After all, if the 3rd Kazekage hadn't died back then, you wouldn't have become the 4th Kazekage. While you've provided funds for the village over the years, if not for the agreements you signed with Konoha, the village wouldn't have fallen into its current state." Faced with Baki's reasoning and the accusatory stares of the surrounding Sunagakure shinobi, the 4th Kazekage found himself at a loss for words. How could he explain his innocence or that everything he had done was for the village? As the Sunagakure shinobi closed in on him step by step, a nameless fury surged in the 4th Kazekage's heart. Reaching out into the air, he summoned a mass of gold dust into his grasp. Without hesitation, he attacked, sending countless shards of gold dust shooting at the surrounding shinobi like a storm of shrapnel. Elder Chiyo quickly summoned her puppets to shield the group, blocking the golden assault. Realizing that his attack had failed and understanding the consequences of further hostility, the 4th Kazekage regained his composure. Gritting his teeth, he formed a series of hand signs. Using the golden dust as cover, he disappeared from the mine and fled deeper in Chapter 317, Acting Kazekage. As the 4th Kazekage disappeared into the distance, becoming a mere black dot on the horizon, Elder Chiyo and the Sunagakure shinobi stood frozen in place. They hadn't expected the 4th Kazekage to attack them, nor had they anticipated his refusal to return to the village with them. His decision to flee left everyone in shock. Given his position, even with suspicions about his involvement in the assassination of the 3rd Kazekage, they had planned to escort him back to the village for supervision until concrete evidence was obtained. Only then would they address the allegations against Raza. However, his escape only deepened their doubts. If he were truly innocent, there was no reason to run. Returning to the village to confront Sasori and reveal the truth of the past would have sufficed. After exchanging uncertain glances, Baki turned to Elder Chiyo. "Elder Chiyo, the 4th has fled. What should we do next?" Elder Chiyo sighed. "For now, let's return to the village. With our current manpower, we are no match for Raza and Orochimaru. We'll investigate further once we're back." Relieved by her decision, Baki and the others let out quiet breaths. They had no desire to fight Raza. Firstly, he was still the village's 4th Kazekage. Secondly, as the strongest shinobi in Sunagakure, capturing him would have been nearly impossible, even with Elder Chiyo's support. Still, the events of the day left them uneasy. In just a few hours, the village had been rocked by a series of shocking events. The rampage of the Jinchuriki, the unexpected return of Sasori with the Kazekage puppet to suppress the chaos, the revelation that the 4th Kazekage had ordered the attack on the Jinchuriki to provoke Gaara's powers, and finally, the discovery of his secret dealings with Orochimaru. They couldn't predict what tomorrow would bring. Back in the village, Elder Chiyo approached the room where Sasori was staying. After being informed that Sasori hadn't left the room, she pushed the door open. Hearing the door creak, Sasori, manipulating Hirako, turned to face her. "Old hag, you're back so soon. Did Raza give you a clear explanation?" Chiyo nodded. "I misjudged you. The order to attack the Jinchuriki came from Raza, but it wasn't meant to kill him, only to provoke Gaara's abilities." "How cold and unfeeling." Still, it suits Sunagakure's traditions, Sasori said with a cold sneer. Then, his gaze sharpened with interest. Now that the Jinchuriki issue is settled, are you planning to deal with me, the rogue shinobi who left the village years ago? How many shinobis have Rasa stationed outside? Is he counting on you to strike first, betting I won't harm my own grandmother? Sasori's probing caused Chiyo to fall silent. Had they not caught Raza and Orochimaru together at the mine, Sasori's suspicions might have come true. Sunagakure would never have allowed Sasori to leave with the Kazekage puppet. But the situation had changed entirely. Under Baki's interrogation, Raza had attacked his fellow shinobi and fled. Whether his flight counted as desertion was another matter, but Sunagakure now had no shinobi capable of matching Sasori's power. With such an imbalance, any interrogation was out of the question. In a way, Sunagakure now needed Sasori's protection. After a moment of contemplation, Chiyo said, Sasori, perhaps I misunderstood you back then. Possessing the Kazekage puppet doesn't mean you were the one who attacked the Kazekage. You may also be a victim. Sasori froze briefly, silently marveling at how expertly Byakuya had manipulated the situation. In just a few hours, he had turned Sasori, with the Kazekage puppet in hand, from a suspect into a victim. Humph. At least you're not completely senile, old hag. However, I'm curious, who do you think is the real killer of the third Kazekage? The real culprit isn't confirmed yet. It could be Raza or even Orochimaru and the Konoha shinobi. After a pause, Chiyo added, before we search for the truth, I'd like to hear your story. Why did you leave the village back then? Why have you refused to return all these years? Sasori fell silent, unsure of how to answer. Byakuya hadn't provided him with a script before leaving, and he feared slipping up if he improvised. Seeing his reluctance, Chiyo sighed. She could guess at the events of the past and understood why Sasori had left the village. Raza's actions had not only led to the death of the third Kazekage but had also caused Sasori to lose faith in the village. Over the years, he had chosen to wander the shinobi world rather than return. Occasionally, he would sneak into the village at night, only to quietly observe the home he had long abandoned. If you don't wish to speak of the past, then don't, Chiyo said softly. After a moment, her tone grew somber. But I do have a favor to ask. I hope you'll agree out of respect for the care I gave you in the past. Sasori's expression turned wary. You want me to return the Kazekage puppet? Or stay in Sunagakure? I won't agree to either, he said firmly. You stopped me from going to the battlefield years ago. Now you want to cage me here again? Chiyo shook her head. I don't need you to return the Kazekage puppet or stay in the village for long. But until the truth is revealed, the village needs your help. Without you, we can't stop the Jinchuriki's rampages. If other villages press us, we'll have no choice but to suffer. You don't want to see Sunagakure fall to outsiders, do you? Sasori fell silent, neither refusing nor agreeing immediately. Sensing his hesitation, Chiyo quickly added, while you're here, the village's shinobi will follow your orders. You'll have the authority of an acting Kazekage but won't have to deal with village affairs. If you want to leave, you may do so anytime. Hearing Chiyo offer him the role of acting Kazekage, Sasori realized their plan was nearing success. Still, Byakuya had instructed him to feign disinterest in the Kazekage position to avoid arousing suspicion. Fortunately, Sasori genuinely had no interest in the title and didn't need to act. He had agreed to this mission for a different reason entirely. Looking into Chiyo's eyes, Sasori said, Old hag, I can agree to your terms, but I have one condition. Chiyo, visibly nervous, waited as Sasori paused briefly before continuing, I want to visit my parents' graves. Chapter 318, Aftermath. The next morning. As the shinobi of Sunagakure woke up and prepared to head to the Kazekage's office to receive their missions, they were greeted by an unexpected scene. The shinobi discovered that the fourth Kazekage, Rasa, was not in the Kazekage's office. Instead, Chiyo and Ebizo, two retired elders, were temporarily managing the village's affairs. Simultaneously, they noticed a fearsome and unfamiliar middle-aged man sitting in the Kazekage's office. The sight left the shinobi bewildered. They exchanged confused glances, unable to comprehend what had transpired. It wasn't that they suspected the elders had usurped power and installed a puppet leader. After all, Raza's victory over Pakura in the election for Kazekage was largely due to the support of Chiyo and Ebizo. With their experience and contributions, either elder could have easily taken the position of Kazekage themselves. But why was there now a completely unfamiliar ninja in the Kazekage's office? Did something happen to the fourth Kazekage? Had he left, or worse, faced some accident? Soon, the shinobi received answers from their colleagues. The previous night, a series of dramatic events unfolded in the village. These included the rampage of the Jinchuriki, the return of Sasori, and the revelation of the fourth Kazekage's collusion with Orochimaru. In the end, after injuring Sunagakure's Umbu, the fourth Kazekage chose to flee the village. The shocking news spread rapidly throughout the village, with shinobi eagerly gossiping under the pretense of secrecy. "I'll tell you this, but don't tell anyone else." Before long, the entire Sunagakure knew of the fourth Kazekage's departure. Even Raza, who was observing the village through his third eye, heard the rampant rumors. Furious, he crushed the sand-crafted eye in his hand. Where did these absurd rumors come from? He thought to himself. When did he ever attempt to harm the Jinchuriki? How could he have colluded with Orochimaru to kill the third Kazekage? Sasori's use of the puppetized Kazekage couldn't possibly implicate him. This was clearly Sasori's conspiracy. In hindsight, when he first heard rumors in the shinobi underworld about a mysterious puppet master, he should have issued bounties targeting puppet masters associated with Sunagakure to capture any suspected rogue ninja. Calming himself, Raza began strategizing his return to Sunagakure and expelling Sasori from the village. First, he couldn't openly re-enter Sunagakure. The accusations of his collaboration with Orochimaru and the attack on Chiyo and others were undeniable. Reflecting on the events, he still didn't understand why he lost his composure and attacked Baki and the others. Second, he needed to find evidence proving Sasori's role in assassinating the third Kazekage. Only with solid proof could he reclaim his authority as Kazekage and pursue Sasori of the Red Sand. As Raza pondered his next steps, a desert viper slithered toward him. Noticing the snake, Raza hurled a rock at it. The snake was enveloped in a cloud of white smoke, transforming into Orochimaru. Raza's expression darkened upon recognizing Orochimaru. Orochimaru approached him with a sly smile. "Kazekage Dano. I've heard about what transpired yesterday. Sasori of the Red Sand infiltrated Sunagakure in your absence and carried out a series of vicious schemes. Not only did he frame us for the death of the third Kazekage, but he also managed to secure a position as acting Kazekage." Raza's face remained cold as he sneered. "Do you think Sasori could have managed all that on his own? Your involvement was pivotal in this mess. If not for your meddling, I wouldn't be in this precarious situation. You suspect me of collaborating with Sasori to frame you?" Orochimaru feigned innocence before continuing. "If that were the case, why didn't I team up with Sasori last night to eliminate you? Do you genuinely believe that Sasori and I, together, wouldn't have the strength to kill you?" Raza fell silent. Orochimaru wasn't wrong. He wasn't a match for both Orochimaru and Sasori combined. However, if the two hadn't planned together, why did Orochimaru and Sasori appear near Sunagakure at the same time, and why did Sasori choose to act precisely when Raza left the village? The coincidence was too striking. Raza frowned and asked, "Even if I were to believe your explanation, what are you doing here now?" With a cold snort, he continued, "I am no longer the Kazekage. The ore you procured can no longer be delivered as promised. Our cooperation has ended." Orochimaru shook his head and replied cryptically, "Kazekage Dano, I believe our partnership hasn't ended. In fact, it's only just beginning." Raza's gaze flickered, focusing intently on Orochimaru. Orochimaru continued, "Sasori is just an ordinary puppet master. He has no experience managing a shinobi village. Even if he becomes Kazekage, he won't be able to secure the funds necessary to keep Sunagakure running. The statement gave Rasa pause, and he nodded before realizing something was amiss. He quickly countered, Orochimaru, the Kazekage puppet is in Sasori's possession. He has the same ability to extract ore as I do. I cannot agree with your assessment. Orochimaru sighed softly, gazing at Rasa with a look of pity. Rasa was momentarily taken aback before hearing a voice behind him. Rasa, why can't you just be a bit more naive and let yourself be deceived? I've already given you plenty of leeway. If it weren't for the rarity of your magnet release ability, I wouldn't have spared your life. Do you really think you've survived thus far on your own merits? Startled, Rasa turned around. On a nearby rock stood a young man, one hand resting on his hip while holding a black rod in the other. He looked down at Rasa lazily. Who are you? Rasa demanded, his expression tense. He then turned to Orochimaru. Orochimaru, who is this man? Is he one of your subordinates? Orochimaru didn't respond to Rasa. Instead, he bowed respectfully to the young man and said, Byakuya-sama, I've done as you instructed and tried to persuade Rasa. Unfortunately, he's too foolish to see his future. Byakuya-sama, Rasa's mind raced. A ninja whom even Orochimaru would address as Sama, Lord? Not even the third Hokage of Sunagakure could command such deference. Who was this person, and why was he targeting both Rasa and Sunagakure? If Orochimaru served this man, did that mean Sasori was also his subordinate? The name Byakuya struck a chord in Rasa's memory. Wasn't that the name of the head of the Amigakure? Byakuya glanced at Rasa without wasting any words. He attacked immediately. In an instant, Byakuya appeared behind Rasa and unleashed a wood-release jutsu. A forest surged from the desert sands, engulfing the fourth Kazekage completely. Chapter 319, Leading the Future of Sunagakure to You. Facing the overwhelming wood-release, deep forest emergence, the fourth Kazekage, Rasa, attempted to resist. He believed that even against Byakuya and Orochimaru, he had a fighting chance due to his magnet release bloodline limit. Magnet release was an exceptionally versatile and powerful ability, granting control over gold dust and enabling flight. Historically, every sand shinobi who mastered magnet release had risen to the position of Kazekage. What Rasa didn't realize was that Byakuya not only understood magnet release's strengths and limitations but also possessed abilities of the same type, only far more potent. Under Byakuya's crushing power, Rasa barely lasted 3 minutes before being defeated. Initially, Rasa tried to counter the trees with his gold dust, attempting to destroy the spreading forest. However, the growth rate of the forest vastly outpaced his ability to destroy it. Sensing danger, Rasa chose to leverage his flight capabilities to escape. But when he ascended several hundred meters, he found Byakuya already waiting above him. Attempting to burrow underground using earth release also failed, as Byakuya's wood clones were hidden below. After multiple failed escape attempts, Rasa resolved to make one final stand, only to be swiftly overpowered. Exhausted and nearly out of chakra, his body was pierced by several black rods, leaving him collapsed in the sands. Struggling to lift his head, Rasa glared at Orochimaru and Byakuya. Finally, he understood why a proud ninja like Orochimaru had submitted to Byakuya's authority. The answer was simple: Byakuya possessed strength far surpassing the 5 Kage. In Byakuya's presence, Rasa felt as though he were a newly minted Jonin facing a legendary Kage. What he couldn't comprehend was why such a powerful figure would bother to conspire against him. Noticing Rasa's confusion, Byakuya casually sat on a nearby rock and spoke with indifference. Kazekage-sama, you must be wondering why I didn't directly attack Sunagakure and instead orchestrated events to turn you into a missing nin while placing Sasori in power. The reason is simple: I want Sunagakure intact, not as a war-torn ruin. Hearing this, Rasa widened his eyes. By removing you from the position of Kazekage, Sasori, as the grandson of Elder Chiyo, naturally becomes the most suitable candidate. This allows us to easily control Sunagakure. Byakuya paused, a faint smile forming on his lips. In fact, I should thank you. If it weren't for your order for Yashimaru to target Gaara, Sasori wouldn't have so easily gained the trust of the Sand Ninja. our encounter would have been delayed considerably. Hearing this, Raza's eyes widened in rage, and he growled through clenched teeth, "Ha! Sasori is indeed your subordinate. And the death of the third Kazekage, was that also your doing, in collusion with Orochimaru?" Byakuya shook his head. "The third Kazekage's death had nothing to do with me. Nor do I have any interest in him. When I first met Sasori, he already possessed the Kazekage puppet. So, our relationship is more of a transaction. I help him become Kazekage, and he swears loyalty to me." Learning that Byakuya's sole objective was to control Sunagakure, Raza's expression softened slightly. Yet, he couldn't understand Byakuya's motivations and asked, "I have one question. Why do you want to control Sunagakure? There's no benefit for you. The Land of Wind's territory is even more barren than the Land of Rain." Orochimaru also looked at Byakuya with interest. While Orochimaru knew Byakuya's ultimate goal was Sunagakure's tailed beast, he was curious how Byakuya would answer without revealing the organization's true intentions. Byakuya chuckled and replied, "Why does one need a reason to control Sunagakure? Just as you desired to become Kazekage, who wouldn't want to become the ruler of the ninja world?" The ruler of the ninja world. Both Raza and Orochimaru twitched at the audacity of the statement. It seemed like something only a naive person would say. Yet, given Byakuya's power, his ambition didn't seem entirely implausible. One day, he might truly unite the entire ninja world under his control. Byakuya's expression betrayed a hint of embarrassment. However, no matter how awkward it felt, he couldn't exactly reveal the truth that he had a system guiding him. Compared to the deranged dreams of those Uchiha lunatics, Byakuya mused, his ambitions were far more grounded. At least he didn't aspire to put the entire world into an infinite slumber. After pondering for a moment, the fourth Kazekage, Raza, asked, "Byakuya, now that Sunagakure is under your control, what do you plan to do with it? Surely, you won't just leave it to its own devices?" "Of course not," Byakuya responded. "Sunagakure's current economic structure is extremely fragile and overly dependent. Aside from the daimyo's funding and the sale of minerals, it has almost no other sources of income. Heck, even the most basic mission commissions for its shinobi are significantly fewer than those of other villages. If this model continues unchecked, Sunagakure is doomed to collapse economically, even without external invasions." Byakuya, as a transmigrator, knew that deserts like the Land of Wind had nothing to offer but one special commodity, oil. Without it, such places are hard to rise. To avoid self-destruction, Sunagakure has historically been the first to initiate wars. However, due to its weaker overall strength, it often ends up defeated by the other four great villages. Raza listened intently to Byakuya's analysis and nodded in agreement. He then asked, "So, how would you solve Sunagakure's economic problems and prevent its collapse?" "That's a complex issue," Byakuya admitted, his expression turning slightly amused. He looked at Raza and said, "Why would I bother answering that question? These matters are for Sasori to handle in the future. What does it have to do with you?" Raza suddenly realized his error. He was no longer the esteemed Kazekage but a captive. Yet, whenever topics about Sunagakure arose, he couldn't help but think from the perspective of its leader, albeit often selfishly. Raza's deeply egocentric nature, his mistrust of others, and his unwillingness to explain himself to anyone defined his character. These traits had not only caused Gaara's tragic childhood but also led to his own assassination by Orochimaru just before the Konoha crush plan. Sighing heavily, Raza seemed to make a decision. He turned to Byakuya and Orochimaru and said, "Since you genuinely intend to govern Sunagakure properly, as evidenced by your understanding of its flaws, I can leave this world without regret. You can proceed now and send this Kazekage on his way." Hearing this, Byakuya frowned in confusion and said, "Raza, when did I ever say I wanted to kill you? Do you think I went to all the trouble of framing you, demoting you from Kazekage to a missing nin, just to take your life?" Chapter 320, Raza's Awakening. Did I really go to all the trouble of framing you, turning you from Kazekage into a missing nin, just to kill you? Raza froze, staring at Byakuya with confusion. "If not to kill me, Then what was all this scheming for? He thought, struggling to comprehend. The awkward silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity. Finally, Rasa broke it. In the ninja world, only the dead can keep secrets. You told me so many secrets just now. Isn't that a prelude to killing me? Byakuya shook his head and raised 2 fingers. First, I have no intention of killing you. While you're not as strong as I am, you're still one of the rare powerhouses in the ninja world. You're useful to me. Second, in my view, even the dead cannot keep secrets, not in this world. The emotional roller coaster left Rasa speechless. He slumped slightly, resigned. Then what do you want from me? Are you trying to recruit me? Do you think I'd agree to something like that? Byakuya pointed to Rasa's chest. I think the seal on your heart is persuasive enough. Besides, as Kazekage, don't you want to see the future development of Sunagakure? Rasa instinctively touched his chest, sensing an unfamiliar presence inside his body. Byakuya's words struck a chord. As Kazekage, Rasa could disregard his children and subordinates, even his own life, but not Sunagakure. The night his wife Kurura died during childbirth, Rasa resolved to dedicate his life to the village. After a deep breath, Rasa finally said, "You've convinced me. Until I see Sunagakure break free from its curse, I won't let myself die disgracefully in the desert." System prompt: Rasa has joined the Akatsuki. You have obtained the magnet release bloodline limit. Byakuya smiled approvingly. That's the Kazekage I admire, willing to endure humiliation for the sake of the village. One day, you'll rise again. Endure humiliation, Orochimaru couldn't help smirking. He had heard Byakuya use this historical idiom before. The man in the story had ultimately destroyed the nation that humiliated him. Byakuya's expression turned serious as he addressed Rasa. Do you remember the plan Orochimaru mentioned to you last night? Your first task is to attack the Wind Daimyo. I'll notify Sunagakure to protect him, which will allow them to control him in the name of safeguarding his life. Attack the Wind Daimyo? Rasa narrowed his eyes. Carrying out such a task would permanently cement his status as a missing nin. Meanwhile, Sasori, who would save the daimyo, would gain his support and solidify his position as Kazekage. After considering the implications, Rasa realized the task was a test of his loyalty. If he couldn't sever ties with Sunagakure and the Land of Wind completely, Byakuya would never fully trust him. After a moment's thought, Rasa agreed to the task. He had no other options. Several hours later, Byakuya, Orochimaru, and Rasa arrived at the Wind Capital. Staring at the daimyo's mansion, Rasa took a deep breath and dove toward it, prepared to sever ties with his past. Within minutes, Rasa subdued the daimyo's guards and took the Wind Daimyo captive. 1 month later, in the Kazekage's modified office, Sasori was quietly crafting puppets. Although officially the acting Kazekage, he resembled a reclusive puppet master uninterested in worldly affairs. Despite this, the surrounding Saiyan shinobi gazed at Sasori with awe and respect. The reasons were clear. Over the past month, Sasori had prevented a rampage by the Jinchuriki Gaara, rescued the Wind Daimyo from the clutches of the former Kazekage, shared advanced puppet techniques, including both combat and civilian applications. Sasori's contributions earned him widespread admiration, solidifying his place as a leader even if he rarely handled official duties. After accomplishing these tasks, Sasori earned the trust and recognition of Sunagakure's shinobi, solidifying his position as the acting Kazekage. Having finished crafting his puppet, Sasori left the Kazekage's office, entrusting the paperwork to Elder Chiyo. He then headed toward Rasa's residence. Chiyo, upon arriving at the office, sighed in resignation but took over the duties anyway. Though she felt somewhat disgruntled about having to work post-retirement, she couldn't bring herself to refuse her grandson. If she didn't handle these tedious affairs, there was always the risk that Sasori might leave one day. Not long after, Sasori arrived at Rasa's residence. Despite Rasa being labeled a rogue after abducting the Wind Daimyo, his children were not ostracized as a result. Sasori's visit served two purposes, to check on Gaara and to reassure Temari and Kankuro. Both Byakuya and Elder Chio had suggested that calming Raza's children would improve relations with Raza's former loyalists, thereby reducing internal strife in Sunagakure. Upon Sasori's arrival, Temari and Kankuro immediately came out to greet him, looking nervous and uncertain. Over the past few days, they had learned the full extent of Raza's actions. Although Elder Chio assured them that their father's deeds did not implicate them, they still felt uneasy facing Sasori. In contrast, Gaara seemed more comfortable around Sasori. Gaara knew Sasori had once stopped one of his rampages and could sense the solitude within Sasori's heart, a feeling he deeply understood. Without needing words, they instinctively empathized with each other. Inside Raza's residence, Sasori turned to Gaara and asked, "Gaara, has Shikaka been bothering you at night recently? If it keeps disturbing your sleep, I'll take care of it." Aware of Gaara's difficulties with maintaining rest due to Shikaku's interference, Sasori had previously sought Byakuya's help. Thanks to Byakuya's sealing techniques, Shikaku's influence on Gaara had been minimized, allowing him to sleep soundly. Gaara shook his head and replied, "Shikaku only makes noise during the day now. I've been able to sleep well." Hearing this, Sasori nodded in satisfaction before shifting his gaze to the puppets in the corner of the courtyard. "Who made these puppets?" Kankuro hesitantly stepped forward. "I did." Sasori's expression grew serious as he evaluated the puppets. "Your work is decent, but I suggest you review the notes I left in the library. Focus on improving your puppet-making skills. I'll personally test you in the future." Kankuro's face lit up with excitement. "Yes, Sasori-sama." To Kankuro, Sasori wasn't just the acting Kazekage, he was a genius puppeteer whose mastery of the art far surpassed his own. The opportunity to receive Sasori's guidance meant his skills would improve significantly. After addressing Kankuro, Sasori turned to Temari. "Temari, take good care of your two brothers. While I'm not skilled in wind release, I can arrange for you to learn from someone who is." Temari nodded, feeling a mix of relief and gratitude. Sasori's willingness to look out for them eased much of the tension she had been feeling. Chapter 321, A Change in Mindset. Sasori wasn't lying, he did know a ninja skilled in wind release. That person was none other than his colleague in the Akatsuki, Kakuzu. While Kakuzu's proficiency in wind release wasn't on par with the Kazekage, he was at least at the level of an elite Joe ninja, more than capable of instructing a young girl Temari. More importantly, Kakuzu was a ninja who worked for money. As long as the price was right, Kakuzu would do anything, except for assassinating the first Hokage. Also, Sasori didn't dislike such a person. Temari nodded slightly, silently accepting Sasori's decision. However, she kept her distance from him, believing that his approach toward her and her two younger brothers was merely an attempt to win favor, to present himself as a benevolent figure to the Sand Ninja. To Temari, this was neither entirely good nor entirely bad. After all, even when their father, the fourth Kazekage, was still in Sunagakure, they never received warmth from him. Now, they had gained another guardian. Just as Temari had this thought, Sasori approached Gaara, extended his hand, and said, "I've finally delivered the old woman's message. So, do you have some time now? Let's find a quiet place outside. The village is still too noisy." Gaara grasped Sasori's hand and nodded in response. Watching the two of them leave, Temari furrowed her brows and glanced at Kankuro beside her. The siblings exchanged a helpless smile. "Kankuro, don't you think the acting Kazekage is strange? He doesn't seem like a Kazekage at all." "You're right, sis. I feel like he and Gaara are the same type of person, kids who were never accepted. How did our village end up with such a troubling acting Kazekage?" Several hundred meters away, Byakuya and the fourth Kazekage stood atop a tower, witnessing everything. When the fourth Kazekage, Rasa, saw Sasori taking Gaara out to play, he also noticed the genuine smile on Gaara's face. That smile made his own expression grow extremely solemn. For the first time, he began to question himself as a father. He always thought what he did as a father was all for the village and his family. Surely, his children should understand, but why did Gaara look so happy? Had he failed as a father? If Byakuya knew what the fourth Kazekage was thinking, he would have laughed out loud. If Rasa was considered a competent father, then the shinobi world had no unqualified fathers. After all, ordering an uncle to assassinate his own son wasn't something an average person could even imagine. After a brief silence, the fourth Kazekage turned to Byakuya and asked, "Byakuya, did you bring me here just to show me Temari, Kankuro, and Gaara, just to prove that they can live better without me? If you want to see it that way, I can't stop you." Byakuya raised a brow, to which Rasa sighed. "I truly am not a good father." The fourth Kazekage crossed his arms and continued, "But I consider myself a competent Kazekage. If I had to choose between the village and my family, I would choose the village." Byakuya gave him a pitying look and said, "I don't want to break it to you, but you're neither a good father nor a good Kazekage." The fourth Kazekage's expression darkened. "How am I not a good Kazekage? Do you have any idea how difficult it is to lead Sunagakure? If I hadn't exhausted myself mining for resources, the village's finances would have collapsed long ago." Rasa began to explain how hard it was to manage a village devoid of any plant life but sand and wind. The Land of Wind daimyo's military funding is limited. The Kazekage, Sasori, you're supporting will eventually have to rely on my methods to solve Sunagakure's financial crisis. Byakuya shook his head. "I'm not denying your contributions to the village, but your entire approach has been flawed from the start. No matter how much effort you put into the wrong path, you'll only get the wrong results." The fourth Kazekage stared at Byakuya, signaling him to continue. Byakuya took a sip of water and explained, "The financial crisis of Sunagakure is due to a combination of geographical disadvantages and war losses. Solving it requires the collective effort of the entire village, not just reliance on a single powerful ninja. In the years after the Third Great Ninja War, you temporarily stabilize the situation through mining, but the moment something happens to you, the village will face an even greater crisis and become completely dependent on Konoha." Hearing this, the fourth Kazekage unexpectedly replied, "You're not wrong. Sunagakure has already become the vassal of another power, not Konoha, but the Akatsuki." Byakuya remained unfazed. "If you truly want to resolve the crisis, there are only two solutions: developing chakra technology or utilizing the natural resources within the Land of Wind. Sunagakure has already fallen behind in biological research. If it wants to catch up, the only way is through puppet technology, creating various puppets to compensate for the village's population shortage. This is why you let Sasori replace me?" The fourth Kazekage began to seriously contemplate. "That's part of the reason." Byakuya glanced at him and continued, "Apart from puppet technology, Sunagakure can also rely on the natural resources of the Land of Wind. Before arriving here, I deliberately investigated the underground regions of the Land of Wind's desert and discovered a vast reserve of oil and gas. With these resources, Sunagakure won't have to worry about finances for decades to come." "Oil and gas? What's that?" The fourth Kazekage didn't understand. Byakuya sighed and explained, "It's an alternative energy source to chakra. While it hasn't been widely used yet, many within the 5 great nations have already begun utilizing it." Hearing this, the fourth Kazekage began to grasp the significance of oil. With Byakuya's explanations, he realized he no longer needed to worry about Sunagakure's future. As long as they had puppet technology and oil, the village's future would be bright. However, what unsettled him was that the one leading Sunagakure to prosperity wasn't him, it was the Sasori of the Red Sand. Under Byakuya's guidance, the Raza reluctantly left Sunagakure and met up with Orochimaru outside the village. Seeing the dejected fourth Kazekage, Orochimaru couldn't stop smiling. He had been framed and exiled from Konoha, but Raza, the fourth Kazekage, had actually been forced into becoming a rogue ninja. The ninja world was becoming more and more amusing. After calming himself, the Raza asked, "Byakuya, what should I do next?" Byakuya rested his chin on his hand, pondered for a while, and said, "You're a rogue ninja now, and rogue ninjas have their own way of survival. Stay with Orochimaru in Land of Rice for now, he has a few mines there if I recall correctly. How did he end up a rogue ninja, only to go back to mining? The fourth Kazekage was speechless. Sensing his frustration, Byakuya continued, mining is just to train your magnet release. Once the time is right, I'll have you and Orochimaru make a move against Konoha, freeing Sunagakure from its shackles once and for all. Hearing this, the fourth Kazekage's eyes lit up. If he was doing hard labor, he would question his life choices. But if it was for the sake of the village, that changed everything. If he couldn't be the Kazekage in the light, he would become the Kazekage in the shadows. At least, as a rogue ninja, he could finally attack Konoha without restraint. From this perspective, maybe being a rogue ninja wasn't so bad after all. Chapter 322, I Want to Live Under the Sun. While the fourth Kazekage was coming to terms with his status as a rogue ninja, the third Hokage, one of the 5 Kage, was in the Hokage office, overwhelmed by the ongoing war on the front lines. The war between Iwagakure and Sunagakure had been going on for 3 months. During this period, there had been no large-scale direct confrontation, but small team skirmishes had never ceased. The casualties continued to rise daily. And so, the third Hokage desperately wanted to change the current deadlock, but there was nothing he could do. He attempted to summon elite jonin from the major clans to the battlefield, but they always found various excuses to decline, forcing him to rely on ANBU forces, further depleting his already limited manpower. The root of the issue was the lack of trust between the clans and the Hokage's administration. After the Uchiha incident, the relationship between the Hokage's administration and the major clans had grown strained for a very simple reason. The Senju and Uchiha, the 2 great clans that founded Sunagakure, had all but disappeared from the village. The Senju clan was absorbed into the village after suffering heavy losses in the First and Second Shinobi World Wars. Meanwhile, the Uchiha clan was wiped out by Itachi Uchiha, vanishing from the ninja world altogether. The remaining clans had taken note of these events and were wary. They didn't want to become the second Senju or the second Uchiha. Therefore, they refused to send too many jonin to the battlefield, even going so far as to avoid earning too much merit in the war. The third Hokage had no choice but to accept this attitude. Unless he wanted to make enemies of all the major clans, he couldn't force them to act. With a sigh, he turned his attention to the 2 intelligence scrolls that had just been delivered. The first scroll came from Sunagakure and contained explosive information. It reported that the 4th Kazekage had attempted to assassinate a Jinchuriki, conspired with the S-rank rogue ninja Orochimaru, and ultimately defected. The 3rd Hokage was stunned. Each piece of information from Sunagakure was more shocking than the last. Why would the Kazekage attempt to assassinate a Jinchuriki? Wasn't the One-Tails Jinchuriki his youngest son? As for working with Orochimaru, that wasn't particularly surprising. Orochimaru was a rogue ninja from Sunagakure, not Sunagakure, so it wasn't a big deal for the Sand Village. Even though the 2 villages were allies, alliances were often just words, few truly took them seriously. Could it be that Sunagakure had finally decided to accept becoming a vassal of Sunagakure? The 3rd Hokage doubted that possibility. The most shocking part of the intelligence wasn't even the assassination attempt or the connection to Orochimaru, it was the fact that the 4th Kazekage had attacked the Wind Daimyo and then defected. The idea of a Kage defecting was unimaginable. It sounded like a pure joke. However, after reading the entire report, the 3rd Hokage began to understand. The reason for the Kazekage's defection wasn't just the assassination attempt or his dealings with Orochimaru, it was his suspected involvement in the murder of the 3rd Kazekage. Logically speaking, if rumors spread that he had assassinated his predecessor, his position as Kazekage would be unsustainable. If the same situation had happened in Sunagakure, if he were accused of killing his teacher, Tobirama Senju, he wouldn't be able to remain Hokage either. Pulling his thoughts back together, the 3rd Hokage began considering his next moves regarding diplomacy with Sunagakure. With the 4th Kazekage gone, Sunagakure would soon appoint an acting Kazekage. It could be an elite jonin, or perhaps his old acquaintance, Chiyo. If it was Chiyo, negotiations would be easier. If it was a new Jonin leader, he would have to analyze their stance carefully. Setting aside the first scroll, the third Hokage picked up the second one, which bore the seal of a toad, intelligence from Jiraiya at the front lines. A brief glance at its contents brought a wry smile to his face. Jiraiya had sent good news. In a time of crisis, Tsunade had appeared at the Konoha military camp, offering her services as a volunteer medical ninja. With 2 of the 3 Sanins present, the front lines had stabilized. It wouldn't be long before Iwabikure sought peace talks. In a deadlock like this, the war couldn't continue unless Iwabikure was willing to suffer mutual destruction. But that shorty old bag Inoki wasn't that reckless. However, according to Jiraiya, Tsunade still refused to return to the village. She didn't want to see him, nor did she want to set foot in a Konoha that was no longer the same as before. After writing his reply, the third Hokage's expression changed slightly, as if he had just remembered something. He then ordered an ANBU agent to summon Danzo. 3 months ago, he had personally ordered the dissolution of Root, using it as a scapegoat for the Uchiha massacre to appease the major clans. But now, he wanted to restart it. To end the war with Iwabikure quickly, Tsunade and Jiraiya alone weren't enough, he also needed Danzo and Root. Half an hour later, the ANBU agent returned to the office with an uneasy expression. Hokage-sama, Danzo-sama refuses to come to the Hokage office. He also said that Root has been disbanded and that he has retired. Danzo refuses to come? And he claims Root has been disbanded? The Hijiran was skeptical. Danzo had always coveted the Hokage position. There was no way he had really disbanded Root, even if he had been ordered to. Noticing the Hokage's doubts, the ANBU agent added, Hokage-sama, Danzo-sama also asked me to tell you that he no longer seeks the Hokage position and doesn't want to remain in the shadows anymore. He said that, in the time he has left, he just wants to enjoy living under the sun. The third Hokage's expression darkened. He didn't believe Danzo would truly give up on becoming Hokage. This was probably a negotiation tactic, he was holding out for better terms. But Root already controlled much of the village's power. If he gave Danzo even more authority, Root's leader would become the true shadow ruler of Konoha. After a long pause, the third Hokage coldly replied, Tell Danzo that he has done well, that he has faithfully carried out my orders. Since that is the case, he no longer needs to serve as the leader of Root. From today onward, he can retire and enjoy his old age. Understood, Hokage-sama. With that, the ANBU agent departed from the Hokage office. Once he was gone, the third Hokage's face turned grim. Danzo would find someone else if he no longer wanted to be his enforcer. There were plenty of subordinates eager for power. Even without Danzo, he would find a suitable replacement, someone who could do the job just as well, if not better. His son, Shinosuke Sarutobi, and Kakashi were both strong candidates. Chapter 323, The Third Hokage and Chersu. Shinosuke Sarutobi was his son and the current head of Konoha's Umbu, possessing the strength of an elite jonin. If he continued to hone his skills for several more decades, it wouldn't be impossible for him to reach the Kage level. All along, the third Hokage had considered grooming Shinosuke to compete for the position of the next or even the one after the next Hokage. Unfortunately, whether in terms of strength or accomplishments, Shinosuke was not qualified to compete for the Hokage title. Serving as the Umbu commander was already the peak of his potential. If he were to replace Danzo, would the war at the front lines become easier to handle? The third Hokage fell into deep thought but soon shook his head and abandoned the idea. First, Shinosuke's strength wasn't enough to lead teams on missions behind enemy lines. Second, he lacked the necessary darkness in his heart, he wouldn't be as decisive as Danzo in dealing with certain matters. Most importantly, once someone took the position of Root's leader, their career would essentially be over. Having dismissed the idea of replacing Danzo with Shinosuke, the third Hokage also abandoned the thought of using Kakashi as a substitute. He didn't care about Kakashi's future, but Kakashi simply wasn't qualified to replace Danzo. Compared to Shinosuke, Kakashi lacked both experience and significant achievements. Moreover, his raw strength was even weaker. After careful consideration, the third Hokage let out a soft sigh. There was no second Danzo in Konoha. He couldn't do it without the old Danzo. Some things could only be done by Danzo. Only Danzo could execute some missions on his behalf. The only question was, what harsh conditions would Danzo demand this time? Half an hour later, the third Hokage arrived at the root headquarters. As he stepped inside, he narrowed his eyes at the completely renovated base. He recalled issuing an order to reform the root organization, having voiced concerns in meetings about root being too dark and straying from the will of fire. But when had Danzo ever listened to him? And yet, Danzo had actually gone ahead and revamped root. Was this renovation not too drastic, though? This place no longer resembled root, it looked more like an academy filled with the will of fire. Danzo always had his own agenda. If he had gone to such lengths to change root, there had to be a deeper reason. Was it possible that Danzo truly wanted to cleanse his reputation and step into the light? After some internal speculation, the Hiruzen continued walking toward the depths of the base, soon finding Danzo seated at his desk, engrossed in reading. The book in Danzo's hands was not some inappropriate material but rather a notebook written by Tobarama Senju. Seeing this, the third Hokage felt even more uneasy. Upon hearing footsteps, Chersu, posing as Danzo, lifted his head, narrowed his eyes slightly, and said, "Hiruzen, what brings you to visit an idle man like me?" Hiruzen casually found a seat and, while observing Chersu, remarked, "Since when did you take such an interest in these writings, Danzo? You're actually studying the works of Tobarama-sensei?" "Of course, I'm studying Tobarama-sensei's philosophy," Chersu replied nonchalantly. "In the past, I was too busy managing root and never had personal time. Now that I've stepped away, revisiting my old interests is only natural." Saying this, Chersu passed Tobarama's notebook to the third Hokage and added, "Hiruzen, you should read Tobarama-sensei's notes more often as well. You'll gain different insights at different times." When Chersu first took over Danzo's identity, he was extremely cautious, fearing any misstep might expose him. However, as time passed, he became more comfortable in the role, even developing his own interpretation of Danzo's character, adding a new dimension to it. His first command after assuming the role was to change Root's entire aesthetic, a decision that had earned him Byakuya-sama's praise. Moreover, Byakuya-sama had once told him about Danzo's defining traits. He desperately desired to become Hokage and frequently used Tobarama's ideologies to pressure the third Hokage. Since then, Chersu has delved into Tobarama's works and even come to accept some of his viewpoints, such as the idea that the Uchiha are inherently dangerous. But if the Uchiha are all villains, could it not also be said that those from the Senju lineage were all hypocrites? Villains and hypocrites had established this village out of necessity. Sooner or later, internal conflicts over interests would lead to its decline. The third Hokage, however, ignored the notebook, his expression turning serious. "Now isn't the time for this. Why did you refuse my orders to lead root in battle at the front lines?" Chersu retrieved the notebook and replied casually, "Root has already been disbanded. I can't head to the front lines alone and have no one under my command. It's not that I refuse the order, I don't have the means to comply." The third Hokage gave him a pointed look. "Do you really expect me to believe that root has been disbanded? When has root ever truly been dissolved? You've merely sent your people on temporary missions, ready to recall them at any moment." Chersu shook his head. "That was the past. Now is different. With the Uchiha issue resolved, root has lost its purpose. Naturally, I saw no reason to keep it operational. And besides, after the Uchiha incident, root can no longer remain in the open. If we continue to operate, it will only make the major clans in Konoha more wary. Wasn't your decision to disband root originally meant to alleviate their concerns? So, why are you questioning me now?" The third Hokage furrowed his brows. "The front lines need root. Without root conducting sabotage operations behind enemy lines, our war with the Wagakure will cost us many more lives." Still flipping through the notebook, Chersu replied, "Sabotage missions don't align with the will of fire. Between short-term gains and the village's long-term philosophy, I believe preserving the will of fire is more important. Hearing this, Hizurin was visibly shaken. Something felt off. Danzo seemed different. In the past, whenever they argued, it was always him who invoked the will of fire. But now, Danzo couldn't seem to stop bringing it up. He stared at Danzo for several seconds before cutting straight to the chase. The village needs root. Name your conditions. I can restore root's funding and even grant you a request, so long as it doesn't violate the will of fire. Hearing this, Shursui looked up again, a faint smirk forming on his lips. Hiruzen, I do have one condition. Since Root is an organization under the Hokage's authority, then any and all of Root's actions, including covert operations behind enemy lines, must have official authorization. Every mission order must be personally signed and issued by you from now on. Chapter 324, A Mission Concerning Konoha's Future. After returning to the Hokage's office, the third Hokage angrily swept everything off his desk. Staring at the now empty surface, he took a deep breath to calm himself and began recalling his conversation with Danzo from half an hour ago. In order to minimize casualties on the front lines, he had agreed to all of Danzo's conditions in exchange for his commitment to head to the battlefield. To be honest, Danzo's conditions weren't particularly excessive. As the Hokage, he should be aware of and approve all of Root's actions before they were executed. However, this also meant he would be held accountable for Danzo's actions. Many of the things Danzo did in the shadows could never be exposed to the public. If he were to officially acknowledge and approve them, his carefully cultivated reputation would crumble in no time. But at this point, he had no other choice. If things continued as they were, his faction's power would dwindle significantly, and even the village's safety would be at risk. After calming himself, the Hizurin picked up the latest intelligence reports from the battlefield. Upon seeing that Iwagakure's Jinchuriki had caused hundreds of casualties among Konoha's forces, his facial expression was grim, and his gaze shifted toward the direction of the Ninja Academy. If Konoha's own Jinchuriki had been combat-ready, the front lines wouldn't be in such dire straits. Danzo had stopped provoking him face-to-face, but his words had carried a veiled threat. However, Naruto was still too young. Sending him to the battlefield now would only make him a liability. Still, even though Naruto couldn't be deployed immediately, he had already been in the Ninja Academy for 4 years, only 2 more years remained before his graduation. It was time to start considering who should be Naruto's Jonin instructor. Finding the right mentor was crucial. At that moment, the third Hokage suddenly thought of Kakashi. Kakashi was the disciple of Minato Namikaze and the strongest among the younger generation of Jonin. Making Kakashi Naruto's mentor was the best possible choice. There was no need to wait until Naruto graduated. The training could begin now. With that decision made, the third Hokage turned to the Umbu beside him and ordered, "Summon Kakashi. I have a crucial task for him." Not long after, Kakashi appeared before the third Hokage, dressed in his Umbu uniform. Looking at the Hokage in confusion, he asked cautiously, "Lord Third, what do you need from me? Are you sending me to reinforce the front lines?" Kakashi believed the request had to be related to the war. Since leading Danzo's route, he served directly under the third Hokage in Umbu. He had only recently returned to the village after completing a mission to track down enemy spies hidden within Konoha. The third Hokage shook his head and replied, "While the war is important, I have an even more critical task for you, one that concerns the village's future." Kakashi was surprised. A mission that concerns the future of Konoha? But high-ranking officials often exaggerated. Whether or not it was truly that important was another matter. The third Hokage could sense Kakashi's skepticism and asked, "Do you still remember Naruto Uzumaki?" Kakashi's expression shifted, and he quickly responded, "Naruto? He's the son of Lord Fourth and the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki, right? Is someone like a villager or a ninja targeting him?" "No, he's not under threat. His reputation in the village is actually quite good, much like Obito back in the day." The third Hokage shook his head and continued, "Naruto is well protected by the Umbu. I summoned you here because I want you to interact with Naruto and begin training him early to guide him into becoming a proper ninja. The Hokage emphasized the word proper. Kakashi hesitated and said, Hokage-sama, as far as I know, Naruto is still attending the Ninja Academy. The instructors there are more specialized in teaching students than I am. I've never taught anyone before. If you really want me to train Naruto, wouldn't it be better to wait until he graduates? By then, I might have gained some experience as a teacher. The third Hokage sighed. In times of peace, I would naturally let Naruto stay in the academy longer. But with the Wagakure's Jinchuriki threatening us, if Naruto isn't properly trained as a Jinchuriki himself, our casualties on the front lines will continue to rise. He paused for a moment before adding, besides, you've been in Umbu for so long, haven't you ever considered leaving and living a normal life? A normal life? Kakashi fell silent. He had nearly forgotten what a normal life even meant. Unlike most ninjas in the village, he had no family, no romantic relationships. Everyone he had ever cared about had been lost to war. The only ninja he still interacted with was my Guy. But Guy wasn't exactly normal either. Every time they met, it was just another challenge, another training session. How Guy managed to maintain his endless optimism and energy remained a mystery. For Kakashi, life in Umbu and life as a regular ninja weren't all that different. After a moment of contemplation, Kakashi finally spoke. I'm not particularly interested in living a normal life. But if it's an order from you, Hokage-sama, I will do my best to interact with Naruto. Do you want me to take him as my student right away? Or should I find another way to connect with him? The third Hokage fell into deep thought. Ideally, Naruto would become battle-ready as soon as possible. If he could be trained into a Jonin within 6 months and sent to the front lines, that would be even better. But even if Naruto were a genius, reaching Jonin level within 5 years was the best they could realistically hope for. After some deliberation, the Hokage told Kakashi, for now, I won't have Naruto graduate early and join a team under you. Instead, you should find another way to interact with him. Over the years, Naruto has lived alone and endured many hardships. I hope you can look after him. But most importantly, I want you to guide Naruto in his daily life, to shape him into a great ninja like his father. A great ninja like Minato-sensei. Kakashi's mind flashed back to the image of Minato Namikaze before shaking his head. So many years had passed since Minato's death, yet the pain still lingered. He could only hope that Minato's child would truly become the kind of ninja his father had been. But was he really the right person to guide Minato's son? For the first time in a long while, Kakashi doubted himself. Chapter 325, Kakashi's Naruto Observation Diary. After receiving a mission from the third Hokage, Kakashi didn't rush to meet Naruto. He decided to observe Naruto in secret for a few days first. Only by fully understanding him could he tailor the training to help Naruto grow into a great ninja. His first stop for observing Naruto was the Ninja Academy. Wearing his Jonin vest, Kakashi entered the academy and found his old classmate, Iruka. Iruka was Naruto's homeroom teacher. If anyone in the ninja world understood Naruto the most, it would undoubtedly be Iruka. Waving his hand, Kakashi greeted Iruka, "Long time no see, Iruka. Your life is still as busy as ever. Have you ever considered changing jobs? I mean, taking care of those little brats is such a hassle, you know?" Hearing this, Iruka was momentarily stunned. The voice sounded familiar. When he looked up, he saw Kakashi and quickly stood up. Caring for these kids is indeed exhausting and troublesome, but I actually enjoy it. Soon, a faint smile appeared on Iruka's face. After all, I'm not a genius like you. I couldn't become a Jonin at a young age. Therefore, being able to stay in the Ninja Academy and contribute makes me feel fulfilled. A genius? Kakashi was taken aback for a moment before shaking his head lightly. I'm no genius. Real geniuses at my age already have strengths comparable to Hokage's. I've just been wasting my years. Kakashi referred to the fourth Hokage, Minato Namikaze, and Byakuya from Amigakure as the real geniuses. He spoke from the heart, but to Iruka, it sounded like humble bragging, leaving him unsure how to respond. To ease the awkwardness, Iruka cleared his throat and changed the subject. Kakashi, you're not just here to visit me, are you? Kakashi nodded. I'm here on a mission from the Hokage. He wants me to make contact with a student in your class. A student in his class. Iruka fell into deep thought. There were quite a few special students in his class, the Hyuga clan's heiress, the successors of the Ino Shikacho trio, the last Uchiha survivor, and the most unique of them all, Naruto Uzumaki. Without keeping Iruka guessing, Kakashi stated directly, to be precise, I'm here for Naruto. You should be well aware of his identity. The higher-ups don't intend for Naruto to graduate early, but special training for him is about to begin. Hearing this, Iruka nodded in understanding. He had known about Naruto's special status for a long time. The Hokage had personally instructed him not to treat Naruto harshly because of the Nine-Tails incident. With the village currently at war with Iwagakure, the Hokage's desire to train a Jinchuriki was understandable. After a pause, Kakashi asked, Iruka, as Naruto's teacher, you should know him well. Tell me about him. Iruka pondered long before explaining, Naruto is a good kid. He may not put much effort into academic subjects, but he ranks among the top 3 in physical training. Outside the academy, he has also received praise from villagers for frequently helping them. In all my time with Naruto, I have hardly seen any negativity in him. He's like a little sun, warming those around him. After hearing Iruka's evaluation, Kakashi felt something was off but couldn't pinpoint what. Minato-sensei had also been kind and warm-hearted toward his comrades. Since Naruto had inherited Minato's bloodline, it was only natural that he inherited his bright and cheerful personality as well. Having gathered some intel from Iruka, Kakashi prepared to leave. He intended to ask more people about Naruto. Only by understanding him from multiple perspectives could he determine what kind of child Naruto truly was. Just as Kakashi was about to leave, Iruka rubbed his hands together and, looking a little embarrassed, said, Kakashi, I need a favor from you. Of course, I won't ask you to do it for free. After work, I'll treat you to a bowl of Ichiraku ramen. How about that? Kakashi turned around and curiously asked, What is it? Iruka quickly explained, the teacher from the next class, Mizuki, is on leave. He's responsible for the practical combat lessons. So, could you substitute for a class and give the kids some motivation? Kakashi narrowed his eyes slightly. He understood Iruka's intentions and smiled. Of course, I can substitute for a class. But don't you think just one bowl of ramen is too little? How about 2? Iruka was momentarily stunned before nodding in agreement. Half an hour later, Kakashi was introduced as a guest instructor at the training ground. Iruka gathered 2 classes of students, first introducing Kakashi as a Jonin and then emphasizing how rare this opportunity was. Having a Jonin personally teach them was not something that happened often. Seeing this scene, Kakashi recalled his own school days and smiled, shaking his head. When it was his turn to demonstrate, Kakashi casually performed the Great Fireball Jutsu. With overwhelming strength, he easily defeated 2 Chunin instructors working together. The students in Iruka's class were all left in shock. As Ninja Academy students, they knew the hierarchy among ninjas. In the ninja world, ninjas were divided into 5 ranks: Academy students who had yet to graduate, Genin who had just started taking missions, Chunin capable of leading a team, Jonin who were elites among elites. And finally, the 5 Kage, the strongest in the ninja world. Kakashi wasn't a Kage, but he was one of the top Jonin. When they saw Kakashi, they knew he was strong, but they hadn't expected him to defeat their instructors so effortlessly. In the crowd, 2 students had peculiar expressions as they stared at Kakashi intently. One of them was Sasuke. He felt a familiar aura from Kakashi, and the fact that Kakashi used the Great Fireball Jutsu, a signature Uchiha technique, only deepened his suspicions. Seeing that jutsu reminded him of his fallen clan members. It had been half a year since the Uchiha massacre, yet Sasuke still woke up in the middle of the night, haunted by memories of that blood-soaked evening and the river of corpses in his clan's compound. If not for that man, he would not have been left all alone. The other student watching Kakashi closely was Naruto. After receiving Black Zetsu's guidance, Naruto was no longer the dead last who couldn't even perform the basic clone jutsu. With his exceptional bloodline and Black Zetsu's training, Naruto had already mastered tree climbing and water walking techniques. Aside from the 3 basic jutsu, he had also learned several D-rank and even C-rank wind release jutsu. Had it not been for Black Zetsu's repeated advice to conceal his strength, Naruto would have already applied for early graduation. However, Naruto was more focused on evaluating Kakashi's strength than Sasuke. He was confident he could defeat Iruka and Mizuki, but he wasn't sure if he could take on the Jonin standing before him. Chapter 326, Kakashi's Concerns. Before witnessing Kakashi effortlessly overpower 2 Chunins, Naruto had a vague understanding of the hierarchy of ninja ranks. He assumed there might be some differences in strength, but not to a significant degree. For instance, while he had confidence in defeating a Chunin, he believed that several Chunin together would always be able to overcome a Jonin. The usually kind and grandfatherly third Hokage, no matter how strong, could at most handle a dozen or so Genin at once. After all, ninjas were ultimately flesh and blood, with no insurmountable gaps between them, or so he thought. However, after witnessing Kakashi's abilities, Naruto's worldview was completely overturned. Kakashi could handle a Chunin with such ease that it was obvious he could also take on a dozen or even 20 Genin effortlessly. For the third Hokage, the number of Genin hardly seemed to matter anymore. The dream of becoming Hokage suddenly felt far more challenging than Naruto had imagined. In the days that followed, Naruto often sensed Kakashi's gaze lingering on him. Though he was somewhat used to being watched like this, it still left him feeling a bit uneasy. After physical training, Naruto attended cultural and political lessons. He listened attentively to the cultural lessons related to his future as a ninja. These were important for his goal of becoming Hokage. However, when it came to lessons on the Will of Fire, Naruto found himself growing bored. It wasn't because he disrespected the concept. When he was very young, he had read every book in the library about the Will of Fire. These books all emphasize the ideals of self-sacrifice and protecting one's comrades. But they rarely taught practical ways to achieve these ideals, nor did anyone clearly define who comrades truly were. At first, Naruto thought everyone in the village was a comrade. Even though they looked down on him due to certain rumors, he believed that if he showed them sincerity, he could earn their trust and gradually gain their recognition as comrades. This proved true in many ways. After he began presenting a cheerful and enthusiastic persona, the villagers' attitudes toward him became much friendlier. Apart from a few individuals who sought to exploit him, most people eventually accepted him. So, Naruto excluded those who didn't recognize him from his definition of comrades. From that moment on, Naruto realized that not everyone in this village, which preached the Will of Fire, genuinely believed in or practiced it. Many people only paid lip service to the Will of Fire while their actions completely contradicted its principles. Some hypocritical villagers were like this, and so were some of the instructors at the Ninja Academy. In Naruto's eyes, the only ones who truly practiced the Will of Fire were Iruka-sensei and himself. Naruto pursued it to earn recognition. But what was Iruka-sensei's reason? Naruto pondered for a long time but couldn't arrive at an answer. However, that didn't stop him from continuing to practice the Will of Fire. To Naruto, it was as useful a tool as ninjutsu itself. After school ended at 3 p.m., Naruto followed his usual routine of wandering the streets, looking for people who needed help. He ran errands for shopkeepers, helped elderly people cross the street, and stood up for bullied children by teaching the bullies a lesson with his fists. While Naruto busied himself to help others, Kakashi silently observed him from the shadows. Naruto's actions were flawless, even better than those of Kakashi's old friend Obito. Unlike Naruto, Obito often made clumsy mistakes when helping others, and his grades weren't exceptional. But Naruto committed no such errors. He was like a textbook-perfect model of a ninja. Seeing this, Kakashi felt conflicted. Naruto had inherited the best qualities of Minato-sensei, which was a good thing. But it also meant that Kakashi couldn't find any meaningful way to help Naruto. He seemed to need no guidance or assistance at all. When night fell, Naruto left the bustling streets of Sunagakure. After wandering for a while, he arrived at a secluded clearing in the mountains behind Konoha. There, he began practicing his throwing techniques and taijutsu against a few wooden training posts. Exchanging a glance with the ANBU assigned to guard Naruto, Kakashi turned his full attention to observing the boy's every move. From Naruto's training intensity and techniques, it was clear that his strength far exceeded that of his peers. He was comparable to or even stronger than Kakashi at that age. Naruto's current abilities were more than sufficient for him to graduate and become a genin, ready to serve on the front lines. However, as a Jinchuriki, Naruto's strength was still far from enough. A Jinchuriki was destined to be a prime target for enemy attacks. Without Jonin-level skills, he couldn't evade assassination attempts or control the Nine-Tails to wield its powerful tailed beast ball. Despite how impressive Naruto appeared now, it was uncertain whether he had even faced the Nine-Tails yet. After 2 hours of training, Naruto finally left the training ground, panting heavily. As Kakashi prepared to follow, Naruto suddenly spun around and said, "Mr. Kakashi, you've been trailing me all day. What exactly is it about me that you find so interesting? Or, were you sent here by Grandpa Hokage? Other than him, no one else has the authority to order a jonin in the village." Hearing Naruto reveal his identity and purpose, Kakashi's face grew slightly awkward. Maintaining his usual aloof demeanor to preserve his authority, Kakashi replied coolly, "Your perception is sharper than I expected. You're right, the third Hokage sent me. My mission is to help train you into a proper ninja." Hearing this, Naruto turned back toward the training ground and called out, "If you're my mentor, then hurry up and guide me. No matter how long I train alone, I'll never fully understand the gap between myself and a jonin." Kakashi's lips twitched slightly at this but followed Naruto. Watching Naruto's calm, unhurried figure walking ahead of him, Kakashi felt a faint sense of disorientation. At last, he understood what felt off about Naruto. Naruto was excellent in every way, except he didn't feel like a child. A child of Naruto's age, no matter how mature, would inevitably show glimpses of childish behavior. Even while mimicking adults, their immaturity would show in subtle ways. For example, when Kakashi attended the Ninja Academy, no matter how cool he tried to act, he couldn't help but grin after defeating Obito in a sparring match. It wasn't until he found his father dead at home that he began closing himself off emotionally. Even then, as a grieving child, he still displayed bouts of anger and tantrums, behaviors typical of his age. Naruto, however, was different. Kakashi couldn't sense any childishness in him. Naruto always wore a smile when dealing with others, and no matter the situation, he maintained a calm, measured demeanor. Kakashi couldn't fathom what Naruto had experienced to become so composed. Was it because he had been an orphan since birth? Or was it the discrimination he faced from the villagers? Kakashi couldn't decide whether this aspect of Naruto's personality was a blessing or a curse. But if Naruto truly had no temper, what would happen to him when he faced challenges no one could help him overcome? Chapter 327, Naruto's Dilemma. Standing in the clearing, Naruto formed the seal of opposition, looking at Kakashi and saying, "Kakashi-san, before starting my special training, I want to see your strength. Challenging a jonin before even graduating from the academy?" Kakashi silently complained to himself but stepped forward to form the opposing seal. He knew that sparring with Naruto would help gauge the boy's strength and allow him to tailor the training accordingly. After the two put enough distance between them, Kakashi smiled amusedly. "Naruto, I won't be going hard on you. However, if you can force me to use ninjutsu, then this spar will be your win." Hearing this, Naruto nodded slightly. Without waiting for Kakashi to call the start, he launched his attack. With chakra enhancing his speed, Naruto appeared in front of Kakashi in less than half a second, aiming a punch directly at Kakashi's nose. Kakashi effortlessly sidestepped the punch and countered with a palm strike aimed at Naruto's stomach, intending to end the spar instantly. With a bang, Naruto was struck, only to vanish in a puff of white smoke. It was the clone technique, one of the basic 3 academy techniques. While it lacked combat ability and physical presence, it was excellent for confusing opponents, making it an essential jutsu for academy graduation. However, the clone technique's utility was limited to beginner-level ninjas. Any skilled ninja could easily see through it, and Kakashi was no exception. To test Naruto further, Kakashi deliberately feigned surprise. Without even turning around, he intercepted Naruto's follow-up sneak attack and prepared another strike. Another loud thud, but this time, the Naruto transformed into a log. The real Naruto reappeared a dozen meters away. Seeing this, a faint smile formed on Kakashi's lips. As a Jonin, Kakashi could easily see through Naruto's tricks, but it didn't mean the same for most Genin. Naruto's mastery of the 3 academy techniques already surpassed many Genin. Just based on that, Naruto was ready to graduate from the Ninja Academy. However, Naruto's current strength was still far from enough to shoulder the responsibilities of a Jinchuriki and stand among the village's elite. In a flash, Kakashi appeared behind Naruto, pressing a stick he had picked up against the boy's back. Naruto felt a cold chill down his spine but managed to narrowly evade Kakashi's attack. Forming hand signs, he unleashed the clone technique again, attacking alongside his clones. Still relying on clones without substance? Kakashi thought disdainfully. Just as he lowered his guard, one of Naruto's clones suddenly landed a solid punch. Kakashi's expression shifted in surprise, but then he seemed to realize something, his gaze turning strange as he looked at Naruto. The spar ends here. I've seen enough of your strength. But I'm very curious, how did you learn the Shadow Clone technique? That's a B-rank jutsu and not part of the academy curriculum. Shadow Clone technique? Naruto looked puzzled, not understanding what Kakashi meant. He asked, "What's the Shadow Clone technique?" "I only know the clone technique." "What are you talking about?" Kakashi sighed. "The clone technique doesn't create physical clones. Only shadow clones can." Realization dawned on Naruto. "Oh, you mean my clones are physical? That's just my modified clone technique. I found that if I put enough chakra into a clone, it can gain physical form." Kakashi was momentarily speechless. He had assumed Naruto had somehow learned the Shadow Clone technique through unauthorized means and had been shocked that the third Hokage would allow Naruto access to such a dangerous jutsu so early. But to think Naruto had developed it himself. As for the brilliance required to create a new jutsu, Kakashi wasn't sure what to think. Most skilled ninjas Kakashi knew had either created their own jutsu or improved upon existing ones. Typically, a ninja would reach the level of a Jonin, master chakra nature transformation, and then begin developing techniques. But Naruto was far from Jonin level and likely didn't even understand chakra nature transformation. To create something akin to the Shadow Clone technique without any prior knowledge was a testament to Naruto's natural talent. From this perspective, Naruto had the potential to reach, perhaps even surpass, the strength of his father, the fourth Hokage. With the 9 tails sealed within him, Naruto might one day eclipse even that. After a moment of thought, Kakashi and Naruto formed the seal of reconciliation, signaling the end of their spar. After confirming that Naruto had at least the strength of a Genin, Kakashi took him to the southern river to teach him the art of precise chakra control. However, Naruto quickly demonstrated his proficiency in tree climbing and water walking techniques, leaving Kakashi in an awkward position. Unsure of what else to teach Naruto, Kakashi bade him farewell, and they both went their separate ways home. Returning to his small house in the village center, Naruto took a hot shower and lay on his bed, chatting idly with the Black Zetsu spirit housed within his kunai pendant. "Black Zetsu, why do you think Kakashi is approaching me? Is it just because Grandpa Third gave him a mission? But every time he sees me, he seems to pause momentarily, as if he's remembering someone else." Scratching his cheek, Naruto continued, "I think Kakashi definitely knows my family. But, like Grandpa Third, he refuses to tell me. Is it because my identity is too special? Or is there some other reason?" Naruto wasn't naive. Even at a young age, he realized he was different from other children. It wasn't just because he was an orphan without parents or relatives. There were plenty of orphans in the village. Some lived with distant relatives, others were sent to the orphanage. However, Naruto was the only orphan in the entire Konoha who lived alone. He had once asked the third Hokage about it, but the Hokage had deflected his questions with vague excuses. Over time, Naruto had grown used to it and stopped pursuing the details of his origins. Yet after today's interaction with Kakashi, the curiosity about his identity has reignited. You're undoubtedly special. You're the reincarnation of Asura, the son of the fourth Hokage, and the Ninetales Jinchuriki. There are hardly any ninjas in this world with a more complex identity than yours. After a moment's thought, Black Zetsu replied lazily, "You've stopped worrying about your past for so long time, so why are you dwindling now? Once you grow strong enough, the answers will naturally come to you." Since neither the third Hokage nor Kakashi had revealed Naruto's true identity, Black Zetsu saw no reason to complicate matters. After all, he wasn't the one deceiving Naruto. His role was simply to play the part of a caring grandfather and occasionally show concern for the boy. In Black Zetsu's experience, the brighter and more cheerful a boy was, the more likely he was to fall into darkness. Chapter 328, Learning the Identity. No matter if it was the third Hokage, Kakashi, or Black Zetsu, they all advised Naruto not to dwell too much on his origins. They assured him that once he grew stronger, all truths would eventually come to light. Knowing the correct answers at the wrong time wasn't necessarily good. But this reassurance relied on the assumption that the third Hokage and Kakashi knew when Naruto was strong enough to handle the truth. Naruto himself, however, didn't have that insight. He had no idea how much effort he needed to put in before he could uncover the truth. If he were lucky, perhaps the answers would come to him tomorrow. If unlucky, the third Hokage might keep deflecting him with claims of insufficient strength for the rest of his life. This uncertainty gnawed at Naruto, leaving him deeply uneasy, even to the point of sleeplessness. After tossing and turning all night, Naruto woke after only 3 or 4 hours of rest. He washed up quickly and tried to shake off his gloomy thoughts before heading to the Ninja Academy. Black Zetsu had a point, it was no use dwelling on his origins. Obsessing over them would only lead to severe mental exhaustion, making it hard to accomplish small tasks like attending school or helping others. But sometimes, even knowing that brooding was futile, Naruto couldn't stop himself from thinking about it. After a restless morning, Naruto found himself back on the streets, habitually helping an old woman cross the road. Once she was safely on the other side, she adjusted her glasses, sighed softly, and said, "Child, your back reminds me so much of the fourth Hokage when he was young. He used to enjoy helping the elderly too." The fourth Hokage? Naruto froze upon hearing the name. It seemed like a clue. If he could uncover information about the fourth Hokage, he might learn about his own identity. Steeling himself, Naruto glanced around the street and suppressed the excitement rising within him, his expression returning to normal. He knew his identity was unusual, with constant surveillance ensuring that the third Hokage could locate him at any time. If the third Hokage discovered that Naruto was investigating this matter, he would surely intervene. Naruto resolved to find the truth subtly, using legitimate means. This might be his last chance to get close to the truth. Over the next few days, Naruto balanced his daily life with his efforts to gather information about the fourth Hokage. It wasn't difficult to find information about the fourth Hokage. A few inquiries with the village elders yielded plenty of details, and the library held records of his many deeds. The fourth Hokage was named Minato Namikaze. He had golden hair and sky-blue eyes, features identical to Naruto's. Like Naruto, Minato had grown up as an orphan in an orphanage. He had displayed exceptional talent from a young age, completing his ninja education in just 3 years. At a young age, he became a Jonin and achieved remarkable success in the second and third ninja wars. With these achievements, Minato outshone his rival, Orochimaru, and was selected as the fourth Hokage. At this point, Naruto felt that the legendary life of the fourth Hokage was beginning. But soon, the village experienced the Night of the Nine Tails. In order to save the village, the fourth Hokage sacrificed his life. Upon seeing the term nine-tailed fox, Naruto's thoughts wandered to his pre-academy days. The villagers used to call him the Fox Demon. Could he truly be the reincarnation of the Nine Tails? The timing of his birth and the defeat of the Nine Tails certainly supported this theory. But Naruto's physical features were identical to those of the fourth Hokage. Couldn't anyone suspect that he might be the fourth Hokage's child? It seemed like the most logical possibility. Naruto shook his head at the thought. If he were truly the fourth Hokage's child, wouldn't he have been treated as a hero's son? No matter how foolish the villagers might be, they wouldn't have shown such disdain for the fourth Hokage's child. The most important point was his name, Naruto Uzumaki, not Naruto Namake's. It was more likely that he was the child of the Nine Tails. If that were the case, the animosity he faced from the villagers would make sense. He had caused them great pain in the past. From this perspective, the Will of Fire might not be a hollow ideal after all. The fact that the third Hokage could accept him, despite his connection to the Nine Tails, and that Naruto could gain the villagers' recognition by helping others, showed that he had transformed from the child of the Nine Tails into a genuinely good person. As Naruto was immersed in his musings about the Will of Fire, his eyes caught the name of the fourth Hokage's spouse. The spouse of the fourth Hokage was Kushina Uzumaki, who shared the same surname as Naruto. Like Naruto, Kushina held a unique and mysterious identity. Naruto wanted to find more information about Kushina, but there was very little available. However, in another book, Naruto learned about the tailed beasts and Jinchuriki. He discovered that tailed beasts were not merely catastrophic monsters, they could also be sealed within the bodies of shinobi. Shinobi who carried tailed beasts within them were known as Jinchuriki. After reading this, Naruto calmly closed the book, pretending nothing was amiss as he opened another miscellaneous volume. Inside, however, a storm of emotions raged. He was indeed an orphan, but he wasn't the child of the Nine Tails. He was the son of the fourth Hokage. The place where he lived was protected at the cost of his parents' lives. Yet, in this village, he had been treated unfairly and labeled as the child of the Nine Tails. Although the period of being labeled as such was short and almost forgotten, Naruto didn't care about that time. What he couldn't accept was the third Hokage's secrecy. Why had the third hidden his identity? Why wasn't he allowed to know who his father was? His parents weren't criminals, they were heroes who had protected the village. After returning home, Naruto sat on his bed, speaking to the kunai pendant in a low, somber tone. Black Zetsu, I've figured out who I am. I'm not just anyone, I'm the son of the fourth Hokage. And I may have inherited something from my mother, a tailed beast. It's because of this identity that my mother and I had to remain hidden. Black Zetsu was slightly surprised at Naruto's investigative abilities. This academy student uncovered so much information in just a few days. For a full-fledged ninja, these details might not be secrets, but it was remarkable for someone like Naruto, a mere academy student with a uniquely guarded identity. Surely, the third Hokage wouldn't have allowed Naruto access to this knowledge. On second thought, however, it made sense. While the third was the Hokage, he wasn't the sole authority in Konoha. There was also the Hokage in the shadows. That figure had once been Danzo but was now under Byakuya's command, Shursui Uchiha. If Byakuya intended to manipulate Naruto, it would be a simple task. After pondering this, Black Zetsu spoke to Naruto. Now that you know this, what do you plan to do? Continue as before, or take action against those who deceived you in the village? Naruto shook his head gently and replied, I don't plan to do anything. Just knowing who I am is enough for me. I'm a ninja of Konoha. I will follow the Will of Fire both now and in the future. Black Zetsu detected the underlying meaning in Naruto's words and smiled quietly. While a Konoha ninja may adhere to Konoha's rules, no ninja remains bound to their village forever. Chapter 329, Settling Matters in Sunagakure. After learning the truth about his identity, Naruto neither caused a scene nor lost control. He calmly accepted the fact that he was the son of the fourth Hokage and the Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. He even decided to continue practicing the will of fire moving forward. Upon receiving this news from White Zetsu, Byakuya smiled mysteriously. Naruto's access to records about the fourth Hokage and Kushina was no coincidence, it was intricately tied to Byakuya. If not for Byakuya's instructions for Shisui to prepare in advance, Naruto might have had to wait until after the Pain Invasion arc to discover his parentage. The question of why Naruto learned about his lineage so late is a curious one. In the original timeline, as Naruto grew older and his unique status as the Nine-Tails Jinchuriki became more apparent, many shinobi in Konoha must have suspected his identity. However, these individuals either hid the truth or deceived him outright. No one ever told Naruto directly. If Naruto hadn't broken the 8 trigram seal himself, he might never have known he was the son of the fourth Hokage. The reason for this secrecy was simple. Initially, no one knew his true identity, and later, they were too afraid to let him know. Suppose Naruto had discovered he was the son of a hero yet endured such unjust treatment as a child. In that case, it might have caused a mental imbalance or even triggered a destructive rampage, resulting in another Nine-Tails incident. Only when Naruto had enough strength and status, earning recognition as a hero of Konoha, did the village plan to reveal his lineage. By then, a successful and respected Naruto wouldn't have pursued the grievances of his childhood. But that was the Naruto of the original timeline. In this altered reality, Naruto was raised under the influence of Black Zetsu. Even though Black Zetsu followed Byakuya's orders and acted as a grandfatherly mentor, Naruto was inevitably affected by his influence and gradually progressed toward darkness. Naruto's reaction to learning the truth was very telling. Byakuya was quite satisfied with his progress toward darkening. If Naruto had reacted with outrage or stormed into the Hokage's office to demand answers, it would have shown that Black Zetsu's influence wasn't thorough enough and that Naruto still had faith in the will of fire. However, the current situation has changed. On the surface, Naruto professed belief in the will of fire, repeated it aloud, and even practiced it in his daily actions. But deep down, Naruto didn't honestly believe in it. He merely treated the will of fire as a tool. Naruto understood that as long as he displayed behavior aligned with the will of fire, he would gain more benefits. Not only would it lower the third Hokage's guard, but it would also sway hesitant villagers and shinobi to his side. By making Naruto use the will of fire instead of being brainwashed by it, Byakuya achieved his goal through Black Zetsu's guidance. This approach would cultivate a vastly different Naruto from the original timeline, a Naruto who could eventually join Byakuya's Akatsuki organization. Pulling his scattered thoughts back together, Byakuya quickly wrote letters to be delivered by his wood clones to Black Zetsu, Shisui, and Kabuto Yakushi. These three were his key operatives in Konoha, where Black Zetsu was responsible for the Child of Prophecy, Naruto, Shisui Uchiha monitored the Hokage's office and the ANBU, and Kabuto Yakushi, the most secretive pawn, gathered intel on the inner workings of Konoha. After finishing the letters and sending them off with the clones, Byakuya turned his attention to a mission report sent by Sasori. Sasori wasn't fond of mission reports but was enthusiastic about exchanging puppet techniques ideas. He had written extensively about the future of puppetry and new developments. Byakuya skimmed through this before reaching the crucial piece of information at the end. 2 months after the fourth Kazekage's defection, Sasori had successfully become the fifth Kazekage. He gradually adapted to his role and got along well with Rasa's 3 children. After carefully reviewing the report, Byakuya felt a sense of relief. He had orchestrated Sasori's rise to power as the fifth Kazekage to exert control over Sunagakure. However, Sasori's ability to maintain control over the village was still uncertain. After all, Sasori had defected from the village as a teenager and was a notorious problem child. There was always the possibility that Sasori might grow tired of the Kazekage position and defect again. With Sasori successfully becoming the fifth Kazekage, Byakuya couldn't help but reflect that Sasori indeed had what it took to secure the position. Despite wandering the world for over a decade, his sense of belonging to Sunagakure had evidently not faded. As a puppeteer, Sasori's personality was akin to a scientist's. So long as he had ample experimental materials, he could immerse himself in research indefinitely. As for the administrative duties of the Kazekage, those could easily be delegated to others. The shinobi world operates on the principle of power above all else. Constantly handling bureaucratic affairs leaves little time for training. However, with Sasori now as the 5th Kazekage and a member of the Akatsuki, Sunagakure could, in theory, now be considered subordinate to the organization. If that's the case, shouldn't the system be rewarding me with a huge payout? Byakuya mused. Just as the thought crossed his mind, the familiar sound of the system notification echoed in his ears. Sasori of the Red Sand has become the 5th Kazekage, and Sunagakure has officially joined the Akatsuki. You have received the Wind Release Ninjutsu Compendium, the Advanced Puppet Manufacturing Compendium, the Wind Release Mastery, and a large amount of chakra. The notification chimed for a solid 10 seconds. The rewards sounded generous, but Byakuya still felt slightly disappointed. The entire Sunagakure has joined the Akatsuki. Logically, I should get a reward for every single ninja in the village, right? Even if lower-ranking shinobi and chunin weren't included, there should still have been dozens of notifications. Then again, on second thought, most Sunagakure shinobi likely only possess basic ninjutsu and taijutsu. Only a select few elites would have mastered advanced techniques or Kekkai Genkai. The system rewards combined all these individual contributions into significant upgrades, such as the Wind Release Compendium and the Advanced Puppet Manufacturing Compendium. The individual chakra fragments from each shinobi had also fused into the large amount of chakra reward, saving Byakuya the hassle of managing numerous small rewards. After claiming his prizes, Byakuya felt a warm current flow through his body, expanding his chakra reserves significantly. The large amount of chakra was no exaggeration. While still falling short of the chakra levels of a full-tailed beast, it was not far behind. His already formidable chakra reserves had grown even more terrifying. Out of curiosity, Byakuya opened his system panel and checked his personal stats. The word Tailed Beast Plus stood out prominently, indicating that his chakra levels had surpassed that of an average tailed beast and reached a realm beyond the capabilities of ordinary shinobi. And yet, this was not his limit. Byakuya speculated that if he could bring all 5 great shinobi villages under his control and gather all the tailed beasts, his chakra reserves would surpass Kurama's and approach the level of the complete Ten Tails. At that point, he might not even need to become the Ten Tails Jinchuriki to attain 6 paths level power. However, as his rewards accumulated, his abilities grew increasingly diverse. By now, he had mastered nearly half of the bloodline limit in the shinobi world and could no longer track how many jutsu he had learned. At this point, Byakuya felt more like the true professor of ninjutsu than anyone else. After all, he had genuinely mastered over 1,000 jutsu. Chapter 330, Strategic Planning and Future Plans. Name, Byakuya. Age, 22 years old. Current affiliated organization, Akatsuki Organization. Chakra attributes, lightning, water, earth, wind, fire, yang, yin. Ninjutsu, substitution jutsu, basic kunai throwing technique, advanced wind style ninjutsu, mastery of water style ninjutsu, advanced paper style, mastery of wood style, disguise jutsu, spore jutsu, mayfly technique. Kekkai Genkai, basic wood style, basic yin-yang style, magnet style. Bloodline, Ashura, Indra. Personal evaluation, peak Kage level, capable of easily crushing most shinobi, but stands little chance of escaping when facing truly formidable opponents. Byakuya glanced at the system panel and silently closed it. To him, the system panel served as a reference and couldn't accurately quantify his actual strength. Before defeating Hanzo of the Salamander, his strength had been evaluated as Kage level. Now, as someone nearing the title of the god of shinobi of his era, his strength was still marked as Kage level. Over the past decade, it seemed his training had been in vain, he still hadn't reached the Super Kage stage. But does the system even acknowledge such a stage? Byakuya had some doubts but quickly brushed them aside. The system appeared to be telling him that, despite his overwhelming panel stats, he wasn't truly powerful. During the early years of the shinobi world, power levels progressed slowly. Even advancing from Genin to Chunin was an arduous task. Yet, in just 3 days during the Fourth Shinobi World War, Naruto and Sasuke advanced from Kage level to the 6 Paths level. Compared to those two, who the Sage of 6 Paths essentially gave a cheat, his current strength was nothing to brag about. Moreover, the criteria for Kage level within the Shinobi world itself were very vague. A regular person who only knew ninjutsu and taijutsu could be Kage level, while a shinobi possessing Akatsuki bloodline powers could also be Kage level. All of them were labeled as legendary S-rank ninjas. After exhaling deeply, Byakuya opened the rest of the intelligence scrolls. They contained development reports for the Akatsuki's subordinate organizations, such as Amagakure, village hidden in the rain, and Kazekage, village hidden in the grass, as well as updates on the war fronts involving Konadakure, Hidden Leaf, and Iwagakure, Hidden Stone. Byakuya wasn't particularly interested in the development reports. Ever since Amagakure and the Akatsuki organization ran smoothly, he had stepped back from organizational management. If he had to handle everything personally, he'd have collapsed at his desk long ago. These tedious matters were better left to Yahiko. After all, among the Akatsuki elites, Yahiko was the only one who wasn't Kage level. For the sake of the organization's growth, Yahiko had to shoulder the burden. Fortunately, Yahiko was naturally suited for administrative duties and diplomatic activities. Whenever Byakuya met with domestic merchants, they always seemed to tremble in fear. He couldn't quite understand why. Was it because he had ordered the assassination of a daimyo or eliminated a few deep-rooted financial conglomerates? These merchants' mental fortitude really needed improvement. After finishing the development reports, Byakuya turned his attention to the war intelligence between Iwagakure and Konadakure. Since Jiraiya and Tsunade had joined the conflict, the intensity of the war between Konadakure and Iwagakure had noticeably escalated, with signs of transitioning from localized military skirmishes to full-scale war. However, Byakuya didn't think it would escalate much further. The battlefield between Konadakure and Iwagakure would likely drag on for a long time but wouldn't expand further. After all, the conflict between the two villages hadn't reached a life-or-death stage yet. If their mutual aggression caused their forces to weaken significantly, it would inevitably invite attacks from other major shinobi villages, particularly Kumogakure, Hidden Cloud Village, which was separated from both Iwagakure and Konadakure by the sea. Kumogakure had suffered considerable losses during the last war, even losing their two-tails Jinchuriki. However, their core combat strength remained largely intact. The village still boasted the formidable duo of the Fourth Raikage and Killer Bee, as well as a significant number of elite jonin. Although Kumogakure hadn't yet intervened in the conflict, they were undoubtedly closely monitoring the situation in the shinobi world and could enter the fray at any moment. Amagakure's true enemy was also Kumogakure. Seizing the opportunity created by the war between Iwagakure and Konadakure, Amagakure had begun secretly trading arms and supplies. Beyond this, the village was working on exerting a more subtle influence over the shinobi world. Similarly, Kumogakure had its ambitions. Recently, they had been active in the member nations under Akatsuki's control, attempting to annex smaller villages and turn them into satellite states. If not for the continuous presence of Kakuzu, Haiden, and others in the smaller nations, Kumogakure might have succeeded in its infiltration efforts. After reading through all the intelligence reports, Byakuya sank into deep thought. He began considering Akatsuki's next steps. The organization's ultimate strategy was undoubtedly to collect all the tailed beasts and weaponize the 10 tails. However, the order in which the tailed beasts were collected required careful planning. Currently, the one tail from Sunagakure was already within Akatsuki's grasp, ready for extraction at any time. The 2 tails and 7 tails Jinchuriki were also under Akatsuki's jurisdiction. This left 6 tailed beasts remaining to be collected. Among them, the 8 tails from Kumogakure was untouchable for now. Killer Bee had a close bond with the Fourth Raikage. If Killer Bee were to go missing, it would undoubtedly alert the Raikage. Although Byakuya was confident he could defeat the Fourth Raikage, his ambitions extended far beyond the 8 tails alone. If Kumogakure could be brought under Akatsuki's control, his power would grow exponentially. Thus, Akatsuki couldn't make a move on the Eight Tails for the time being, at least not under Byakuya's direction. The plan to hunt the Eight Tails would have to be shelved for now. As for the Four Tails and Five Tails Jinchuriki from Iwagakure, they were also off-limits for the moment. These were formidable Jinchuriki who had once forced Jiraiya and Minato Namikaze into retreat during a combined effort. Akatsuki currently lacked the manpower to confront them. It would have to wait until Kisame Hoshigaki joined their ranks. The Nine Tails Jinchuriki from Sunagakure didn't even warrant discussion. Naruto, as the child of prophecy, was far more significant than simply being a Jinchuriki. He would undoubtedly be the last target of the hunt. Having ruled out these options, Byakuya's only remaining choice was Kirigakure, Hidden Mist Village. Kirigakure was notorious for producing rogue ninjas. In the original timeline, it gave rise to formidable defectors like Zabuza Momochi, Juzo Biwa, and Kisame Hoshigaki. Even the village's leader, the fourth Mizukage, had been a puppet controlled by Obito. In this timeline, Obito had similarly taken control of the fourth Mizukage. To collect the tailed beasts from Kirigakure, Akatsuki would inevitably have to deal with the fourth Mizukage. Thus, hunting the tailed beasts from Kirigakure wouldn't be particularly difficult. The problem lay in Byakuya's relationship with Obito, which was far from amicable. Although Byakuya had used brute force to secure his position and status within Akatsuki, he rarely issued commands to Obito. For the most part, Byakuya and Obito operated independently. Byakuya had issued a few orders to Obito, and Obito had shared little information about Kirigakure's operations. All the intelligence Byakuya currently possessed came from his prior life memories and reconnaissance conducted by his wood clones. Before hunting the Three Tails and Six Tails from Kirigakure, Byakuya needed to find a way to wrest control of Kirigakure from Obito. But how to implement this plan required careful thought. If he tried to force Obito to relinquish control of the fourth Mizukage, Obito would undoubtedly refuse. Moreover, the hunt for the tailed beasts had to remain covert. If Akatsuki's plans to collect the tailed beasts were exposed prematurely, the organization, no matter how powerful, wouldn't be able to withstand an assault from the remaining major shinobi villages. If Akatsuki's development faltered, Byakuya's growth would also slow, leaving him unprepared to deal with the extraterrestrial threats that would emerge in the later stages of the shinobi world. Thus, to fully integrate Amagakure's power under his control, Byakuya needed to carefully devise a strategy and identify a suitable candidate to serve as the next Mizukage. That's the end of this tale for now. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in part 13. Peace.